Chapter 190. Still laughing. I'm here for an old friend after getting drunk tonight. And he held the wine jar lightly. His face was red and his words were slurred. Hua Yuxian smiled and said, General's Yin is drunk. A small jar of jade fragrant wine was emptied, and before the sound of the zither stopped, everyone was already drunk. Yin He and Lin Shuanghe were the most drunk. Lin Shuanghe raised his fan and fought bravely with Yin He. What's so great about a wife? How can someone who has a wife understand the value of freedom? What do you know? Yin He scolded him drunkenly. Are saying sour grapes because you can't eat them. Yang Mingji's alcohol tolerance was low. After drinking a little, he felt dizzy. He did not go crazy. He just sat there with restraint. No one knew what he was thinking. His gaze was a little unfocused. He Yan's current alcohol tolerance was even worse than Yang Mingji's. Although the rose dew was sweet, it was still mixed with alcohol. After drinking a few cups, he felt sleepy. He didn't know when he felt that his head was heavy and his feet were light. He laid his head on the table and slept soundly. In the group, only Chu Zhao and Xiao Ju were sober. There's an empty room upstairs, Kyle Yin said. Why don't we send them upstairs to rest for a while? I'll ask the girls to make some hangover soup. When they wake up, they can drink it directly. Xiao Ju nodded. Not to mention other things, just Yin He and Lin Shuanghe stayed alone. If they were put on the streets, something big might happen. Kyle Yin ordered people to help Lin Shuanghe and Yin He upstairs. Yang Mingji stood up shakily and tried to stay awake. He smiled and said, I don't need to. My carriage is still outside. I'll go back and rest. After saying that, he did not wait for a reply and walked out. Hua Yuxian was worried. This Xiao Ju. Let him be. After Yang Mingji left, Chu Zhao looked at He Yin. Just as he was about to speak, Xiao Ju walked in front of He Yin and patted her back, calling her He Yin. He Yin was half asleep. Subconsciously, he slapped Xiao Ju's hand away and continued to sleep. Xiao Ju paused for a moment, bent down, and carried He Yin. The girl who was playing the guqin at the side was shocked. Her fingers moved, and the guqin made a strange sound. Hua Yuxian lowered her head and smiled. She said to Xiao Ju, Young Master Xiao, please follow me. Seeing Xiao Ju take He Yin away, Kyle Yin looked at Chu Zhao. Young Master Chu. The young man smiled gently at her. Sorry to trouble you. The room was in the corner of the upper floor. It was far away from Lin Shuanghe and Xiao Ju. At the end of the corridor was the attic. At a glance, it looked like a celestial mountain pavilion. Hua Yuxian stood at the door and smiled. No one has lived in this room before. It is cleaned every few days. Young Master Xiao, please. Xiao Ju thanked her and carried He Yin into the room. Hua Yuxian left. Xiao Ju was tall, and He Yin was thin and short. It was easy to carry him. It did not feel like carrying a girl. Instead, it felt like carrying a cat. The bed in the room was very low. Perhaps it was because no one had lived here before, so it was cold and cheerless. Xiao Ju bent down and placed He Yin on the bed. Then, she half knelt on the ground and leaned against the head of the bed. She covered him with a blanket. The moonlight was hazy and the summer breeze was light. It blew in through the window and seemed to have lifted the alcohol. The young man lowered his head to look at the girl sleeping on the bed. Yin He's words seemed to ring in his ears. I'm afraid you haven't even held a girl's hand in your life. You still have your first kiss. He lowered his eyelashes and stared at the person on the bed. He whispered to himself, That's not true. He Yin had almost suffocated to death in the water during the battle in Jiang. At that time, he was eager to save her and helped her vent his anger. That should be his first kiss, if it could be considered a kiss. However, this person did not seem to know. This made him a little unhappy. The young man bent his fingers as if he could not help but hit her as a punishment. However, he stopped when his fingers were about to touch He Yin's forehead. Then, the hitting turned into a gentle caress. Xiao Ju tucked the messy hair on her face behind her ears. Before they left, Lin Shuanghe's words came to his mind again. Huaijin, oh Huaijin, if you like Mimi He, you should fight for her. Even if she likes Chu Xilan, you should know that it is impossible between her and Chu Xilan. Chu Xilan is also not a good match. With your appearance and family background, are you afraid that you can't compare to Chu Xilan? I don't know what Mimi he has encountered before, But as long as you treat her well and don't act so unreasonable, it should be easy for her to fall in love with you. Do you know that in Mimi He's heart, she has never thought that she should be favored?" The young man stared at the girl on the bed. His gaze gradually deepened. Even if Lin Shuanghe did not say it, he could feel it. However, this did not make sense. According to Luan Ying's information, he doted on this daughter of his and would not make her belittle herself. In the martial arts arena, she was free and unrestrained in the light of swords. Compared to the humble and cautious in the ordinary world, there was a clear contrast. This was a contradictory person. However, this contradiction made her particularly eye-catching. Xiao Ju lowered his eyes to look at her. He reached out his hand as if he wanted to touch her cheek. Just as his fingers were about to touch her cheek, he suddenly woke up. He immediately retracted his hand and stood up. After a pause, he closed the window, closed the door, and went out again. The wind and moon outside were cool and refreshing. In the pavilion, it was like the old scenery. The young man walked slowly, his expression indifferent. He was dressed in a black brocade robe. The corner of his robe was embroidered with a beautiful and dangerous golden python. From afar, he drew a bright shadow in the night. On the long bench in the pavilion, someone had already arrived, leaning against the carved railing and drinking. Xiao Ju walked over. That person stood up and bowed to him. "Young Master Xiao." It was Hua Yuxian. The young masters have all been sent back to their rooms to rest. Hua Yuxian smiled mischievously. "Don't worry, young Master Xiao." The girls did not dare to enter their rooms. The servants are all serving them. This group of young masters were either rich or noble. They did not come to entering Cloud's Tower to have fun. In Hua Yuxian's heart, she had never treated them as guests. She only thought of them as friends visiting and resting temporarily. Xiao Ju did not say anything. Hua Yuxian held the railing in the pavilion with both hands and looked into the distance. The clear moon was in the sky, sprinkling silver frost everywhere. She said, "I did not expect to meet the young masters again after so many years. I am really happy today. If Mama Ding was still here, she would be just as happy." "Why did you divorce?" Xiao Ju asked. Hua Yuxian was stunned. The young man did not look at her. He only looked at the flickering lights on the street under the pavilion and asked casually. After a while, Hua Yuxian smiled. "Why else? Because what I got was not what I wanted." She sighed. "Young masters, I was the same as you in the past. I thought that as long as I chased away the evil people, we would be reunited. But I did not know that there are all kinds of difficulties in the world. The evil people are just one of the simplest. Back then, everyone helped Hua Yuxian chase away Tong Qiushi. After taking back the contract, Hua Yuxian followed Wang Sheng to Yangzhou. Even though Mama Ding and the sisters in entering Cloud's Tower were very reluctant, they still hoped that Hua Yuxian could be together and live a happy life. Hua Yuxian and Wang Sheng did have a period of loving and harmonious days. That was before they came to Yangzhou. When they came to Yangzhou, all kinds of trials and tribulations followed. Although the Wang family was a merchant, they were also a famous rich family in Yangzhou. When they heard that their son had brought back a woman with no status, they were already unhappy. When they found out that this woman came from a brothel, they were even more against it. Only now did Hua Yuxian know that Wang Sheng did not tell Madame Wang and Master Wang about them from beginning to end. If their son married a woman from a brothel, they would become a joke in Yangzhou. Hua Yuxian knew that her status was low and did not want to make things difficult for Wang Sheng. Seeing his firm attitude, she was embarrassed and sad. She told Wang Sheng that they should separate. Wang Sheng was unwilling. How could he lose the happiness that he had fought so hard for in the hands of his parents? In anger, Wang Sheng went on a hunger strike in protest. He only told his parents that if they could not marry Hua Yuxian, he would leave and never return. He would never return to Yangzhou again. There were no parents in the world who could win against their children. Madame Wang loved her son, so in the end, she gave in and agreed to let Hua Yuxian marry into the family. But they could not tell others that Hua Yuxian was a distant relative's cousin who came to seek refuge. The neighbors of Yangzhou did not know the twists and turns and only thought it was true. So Hua Yuxian married into the Wang family. She thought that after the bitterness, there would be no more bitterness. She did not expect that this was just the beginning. Madame Wang was prejudiced against Hua Yuxian. Since she married into the family, she deliberately beat her. Every morning and evening, she set the rules. She was not allowed to leave the residence. She had to take care of everything. If there was anything wrong, she would say in a strange tone, "It's not your fault." After all, that was not all. After Madame Wang tortured Hua Yuxian, Wang Sheng would comfort his wife when they were alone and apologize to Hua Yuxian on behalf of his mother. Hua Yuxian also thought that time would reveal a person's heart. Maybe after a long time, Madame Wang would see her sincerity and her misunderstanding of her would be resolved. Although both of them knew that this was just self-deception. When Hua Yuxian was at entering Cloud Tower, she was famous for her beauty. After she married into Yangzhou, although she did not go out, she would still come out to receive people when the Wang family held a banquet. But anyone who saw her face was stunned by her beauty. After a while, the news spread in Yangzhou that the son of the Wang family of Shang dynasty married a wife. The new wife, young Mistress Wang, was extremely beautiful. The rumor spread more and more. There were even some ignorant and incompetent young masters in Yangzhou who sneaked into the residence just to see the legendary young Mistress Wang. Madame Wang was even angrier. She often scolded Hua Yuxian for being unfaithful and attracting flowers and butterflies. Hua Yuxian also felt wronged. She did not use her beauty to do anything. How could she be blamed for all the sins and absurdities caused by beauty? At the same time, Wang Sheng's attitude towards Hua Yuxian changed. After a long time, his infatuation with Hua Yuxian was gradually replaced by the annoyance caused by various trivial matters in the residence. When Wang Sheng heard Madame Wang's complaint, he had a thought. If only I hadn't married Hua Yuxian back then. He was shocked by this thought and forced himself not to think about it anymore. Unfortunately, if there was a first, there would be a second. This thought appeared more and more frequently. In the end, even his guilt was worn away. The last straw that broke the camel's back finally came. One day, a nephew of Madame Wang came to Yangzhou as a guest and temporarily stayed with the Wang family. This person was originally idle and ignorant. When he saw Hua Yuxian, he was shocked. Then, he learned from Madame Wang that Hua Yuxian was originally a prostitute who left her virginity. He immediately had bad intentions. Hua Yuxian's status in the Wang family was not high. The nephew wanted to take advantage of her and have a good time with her. Unfortunately, Hua Yuxian was not as degenerate as others thought. She sternly stopped this person's actions. The nephew was not satisfied. He actually said in front of Madame Wang that Hua Yuxian seduced him. Madame Wang was furious. She ordered Hua Yuxian to be locked in the woodshed as punishment. At that time, Hua Yuxian still had a glimmer of hope. As long as Wang Sheng believed her, maybe she could have lasted longer. Unfortunately, unconditional trust was rare in the world. Not only did Wang Sheng not stand on her side, he was also swayed by Madame Wang's words. Madame Wang said, she was originally a prostitute who slept with thousands of men. How could she be at ease with you at home? As long as she has the chance, she will seduce men. My son, do you want to be proud of being cuckolded? Do you want our Wang family to become a joke in Yangzhou? Divorce her. Wang Sheng wrote the divorce letter. Hua Yuxian looked at the man she once loved deeply. She said coldly, if you want to divorce your wife, I dare to tell everyone in Yangzhou that I came from Jinling City's Yunlu. Your Wang family took a prostitute as a bride. You. Wang Sheng was furious. Do you want to pester me? You think too much, young Master Wang. Hua Yuxian slightly curled her lips, but in her eyes, there was no longer the affection of the past. What I mean is divorce. The Wang family valued their reputation the most. They also wanted to get rid of Hua Yuxian, this stain. The divorce went smoothly. On the other hand, when Wang Sheng got the divorce letter and Hua Yuxian left, he thought of the past. He was reluctant to part with her and tried to persuade her to stay. The flower fairy looked at him and said, young Master Wang, when I married you back then, I hoped that you could fulfill my childhood wish and accompany me to all the famous mountains and rivers. However, ever since I married you, I have never stepped out of the Wang family. Now that the grudges are settled, Young Master Wang is not a good person. Only this farewell. I hope we will never meet again." She left especially calmly. When she left Yunlu that year, Madame Ding once told her, "Yu Xian, have you ever seen a moth flying into a flame? What good ending?" She was young at that time. Hearing this, she just smiled and replied, "Even if there's a moment of light and warmth, a moment is enough." The woman gently touched the corner of her eyes. She was still beautiful, but not like before, because the young and fearless girl never thought that this love was really so short. So much so that the struggle and persistence in the past seemed particularly ridiculous. "Let's not talk about me." Hua Yuxian smiled and changed the topic. "Young master, is the girl beside you the little girl from that year?" When she said this, Xiao Ju suddenly looked up. "What did you say?" Chapter 191. Hua Yuxian paused and said, "Young master, isn't he a girl?" "Not this," Xiao Ju frowned, her beautiful eyes sharpening. "You mean the girl from that year?" Hua Yuxian nodded, slightly confused. "That masked girl, doesn't young Master Xiao know?" Xiao Ju's gaze became incredulous. "Girl? Young Master Xiao doesn't know even now?" Hua Yuxian was also surprised. Back then, young Master Xiao had specially asked someone to change the little girl's Bifong wine to rose dew. "I thought young Master already knew about it." She seemed to recall something, and her eyes curved. "Because of that, I deliberately teased her, making her blush. It was very interesting." Xiao Ju's expression was shocked, muttering, "I didn't know." At that time, he could smell the sweet and mellow sweetness of the Bifong wine. It was very intoxicating. He Rufei had just been beaten up in the village and had just been treated with medicine. If he wanted to drink wine, it was better to drink something lighter. Thus, he ordered Hua Yuxian to change it to sweet rose dew. But Xiao Ju did not expect Hua Yuxian to tell her now. He Rufei was a girl? "Are you sure?" Xiao Ju looked at the girl in front of her. "He is a girl. When I was at entering Cloud's brothel, occasionally there would be girls from rich families who would dress up as men and come here to play. Mother told us that if we met such girls, we should not expose them, let them play and just protect them. So if they were really girls dressed as men, I would be able to tell at a glance." That masked young master was actually very good at dressing up as a man. There were no signs of earrings or hairpins. His actions were no different from a normal man. It's just that this servant always felt that something was wrong, so I found an excuse to sit beside her. She laughed. She was clearly wrapped around her chest and was extremely nervous. This servant just teased her a little, and she became extremely flustered. But that mask was quite good at scaring people. If it was someone else, they would not be able to tell. And the young masters did not have much contact with girls at that time. It is natural that they would not be able to tell at a glance that she is a girl. Xiao Ju was speechless. He and Rufei had not been classmates for a long time, only a year or so. But all these years, he had never doubted that Rufei was not a man. It was hard to believe that Hua Yuxian would suddenly say something like this. However, he knew very well that Hua Yuxian was not one to speak without thinking. Although she had said it in a euphemistic manner, she must have said it because she was certain. From the looks of it, the Missy today is not the same person as the young master back then. Hua Yuxian looked at Xiao Ju curiously. "I thought that the way young master Xiao took care of that lady was the same as back then. I thought it was the same person." Xiao Ju's mind was in a mess. She shook her head and said, "She's not. Young Master Chu seems to be interested in Missy as well." Hua Yuxian rested her chin on her hand. This action made her look like a young girl. "However, I can tell that she likes you." Xiao Ju raised his eyes to look at her. "Young Master probably does not know." Hua Yuxian laughed lightly. "At the table today, she spent more time looking at you than she did looking at young Master Chu. Also, when Kyle Yin called someone to persuade them to drink, Missy was so nervous that she almost dropped the cup. If young master likes Miss He, you have to be more proactive. If a flower is beautiful enough, more than one person will want to pluck it." After saying this, she straightened her body and picked up the wine pot on the table in the pavilion. She said, "I'm also drunk. I will go back to my room to rest. Young master, please stay here and think about it slowly. Once you understand, everything will be clear tomorrow." She bowed to Xiao Ju flirtatiously and said, "Goodbye." Hua Yuxian disappeared into the depths of the corridor. Xiao Ju sat in the pavilion and looked at the lantern on the table. After talking for so long, until now, he was still shocked by one thing. He Rufei was actually a woman? No one had seen He Rufei's face under the mask. Was He Rufei a woman from the beginning? Or was the He Rufei that followed them to Jinling a woman? Xiao Ju pondered for a moment and concluded that the He Rufei that followed them to Jinling was not replaced. It was the He Rufei that he met in the Xianchang restaurant. In other words, the He Rufei in the Xianchang restaurant, the He Rufei in front of the world, was a woman. For a moment, all the strange behaviors of He Rufei in the past suddenly became reasonable. Why did he always wear a mask that covered his entire face, not even taking it off when he was sleeping? Why did the servants of the He family keep a distance from He Rufei and never served him personally? Why did no one ever bathe in the hot spring with He Rufei? Why was He Rufei not strong, short, and much thinner than the average teenager? Because He Rufei was a woman. However, the He Rufei that took off the mask in front of Emperor Wenshuan was clearly a real man. The previous battle in Huayuan appeared in front of his eyes again. He Rufei, who was brave and good at fighting, was defeated in the battle in Huayuan. His trusted aides were all killed in battle. How similar was this to the battle in Mingshui? In the battle in Mingshui, they were silenced because Xiao Zhongwu's deputy generals knew the truth of the main general's murder. In the battle in Huayuan, why did they have to silence them? Did those trusted aides who were killed in battle discover some great secret? After thinking about it, the biggest secret was nothing more than the General Fei Hong that followed him to the battlefield in the past, and the General Fei Hong that was personally conferred in front of His Majesty were not the same person at all. In fact, they were far from each other. Fei Nu, in the darkness, Fei Nu walked out. He couldn't hide the surprise in his heart. That year, Fei Nu accompanied Xiao Ju to Jinling. He was also one of the imperial bodyguards. Naturally, he also knew that the young man wearing the mask was He Rufei. Now that so much time had passed, how could he not be surprised when he found out that General Fei Hong, who was feared by the world, was actually a woman? Quickly inform Luaning to thoroughly investigate everything about the He family, starting from He Rufei's birth. In addition, find out if there are any soldiers in the Fuyue army who fought alongside He Rufei and secretly protect their safety. He stood up. I'm afraid that very soon, someone will want to silence them. The sun shone on his face, making his hair fluffy. Ian reached out to block the dazzling sunlight outside and slowly opened his eyes. In the room, a girl was putting a basket of porridge on the table. She smiled and said, "Little Gongzi, you're awake? Did I fall asleep?" Ian asked. Last night, after drinking a few cups of rose dew, he was extremely sleepy. He didn't know when he fell asleep. His current alcohol tolerance couldn't be compared to his previous life. One had to know that Yin, who was still young, couldn't even drink a few cups. Little Gongzi went to bed early. It was young Master Xiao who sent you back to your room. The girl pursed her lips and smiled. Young Master Lin and young Master Yin are already awake. They've already eaten and are waiting downstairs. Little Gongzi, after eating breakfast and washing up, you can go downstairs. She didn't have any intention of serving Yin. After placing the food on the table, she left. It should be Xiao Ju's idea. Now that she was a girl, only Yin He and Yang Mingji didn't know. But at least for now, the fewer people who knew, the better. Yin ate and tidied up before going downstairs. As soon as he went downstairs, he heard Yin He and Lin Shuanghe arguing. Yin He said, "Impossible. You got drunk first yesterday." "Come on, Yin Nangguang. I saw that you drank too much. How could I get drunk first? Don't deny it. If you don't believe me, you can ask Huaijin. Huaijin, was I drunk first or was he drunk first?" Without waiting for Xiao Ju to answer, Yin He quickly said, "Why are you asking him? He's your friend. Of course, he's on your side. Anyway, you got drunk first." "Yin Nangguang, does your wife know that you're acting so shamelessly?" Yin went downstairs and greeted them. He looked at Xiao Ju, who was sitting in front of the window. He was looking out of the window. No one knew what he was thinking. He didn't even notice Hien coming downstairs. This was strange. Hien walked to Lin Shuanghe and asked, "What's wrong with Commander-in-Chief? You seem to have a lot on your mind." Lin Shuanghe shrugged. "Who knows? He's been like this since early morning. Maybe he's thinking about what will happen after he returns to Shuajing." He said it simply, but Hien was a little worried. Could it be that she said something crazy when she was drunk last night? He really didn't have any recollection of it. But Hien looked around. Why don't I see Official Yang and Fourth Young Master Chu? It seems that they didn't stay in Ruyun Lu last night. Yang Mingji doesn't like these places. As for Chu's Island, Lin Shuanghe deliberately looked at Hien and said slowly, "If he stayed in Ruyun Lu last night, Su Pingting will skin him alive when he returns to Shuajing. That's not all. I'm afraid that the entire Ruyun Lu will suffer." So he did a good deed. While they were talking, Yin had already walked to Xiao Ju's side and slammed the table. "Come back to your senses." Xiao Ju looked up. "Didn't you say that you were going to find Yang Mingji in the morning? Hurry." Yin was very anxious. "If you have something to say it quickly. Don't delay our return to Shuajing." He rubbed his hands. "I told Qingxiu the time of our return to Shuajing, not even a day later. Ever since he knew that he was a model husband, he didn't hide it anymore. 8 out of 10 sentences were about his wife." Xiao Ju was too lazy to pay attention to his seemingly careless showing off. She stood up and said to everyone, "Let's go." When they got on the carriage, Hien finally had a chance to ask the question he was most concerned about. "Governor, General Yin, why are we going to find Official Yang?" Probably after everyone drank together last night. He classified Hien as one of their own camp. He didn't hide anything and said, "I don't know. I only said that it has something to do with Yudo. Anyway, we'll know when we get there." Speaking of Yudo, his expression became somewhat serious. "I don't know what the situation is like in Shuajing. The Yangfu wasn't close to entering Cloud's tower, but it wasn't far either." After a few minutes, the carriage stopped in front of the Yangfu. Yang Mingji was the governor of Jinling, but his residence was very simple. At first glance, it didn't look any different from a normal residence. Hien still remembered that when Lu Rue was the governor of Jinling, he heard his friends say that the residence was luxuriously renovated. It was so luxurious that the youths who went to steal contracts almost got lost in the garden. Yang Mingji wasn't greedy for riches and honor. At least, his original intentions hadn't changed. Then, why did he say such hurtful words to his good friend that year? Hien pondered in his heart as he followed everyone into the main door. There weren't many servants in Yang Mingji's residence. It looked like the residence of a normal scholar in Jinling. The garden wasn't taken care of. Some bamboo was randomly planted. When they reached the main hall, there were very few decorations. The most eye-catching things were the various landscape paintings hanging on the wall. Hien went over to take a look. There weren't any famous paintings. They were all written by Yang Mingji himself. There was also a piece of paper and ink on the table. It hadn't been framed yet. 10 years of study, Yanhua is still beautiful. Don't chase the world, fighting cock eastern suburbs. Riches and honor are like floating clouds. Gold and jade aren't treasures. Once the pelicans roar, the frost is strong grass. Ambition is lost, and tears are stained with hugs. Hien was startled. Why did Yang Mingji write this? Who was he satirizing? Who was he crying for? Before he could think of a reason, he heard a person come out and say, "You're here." It was Yang Mingji. He didn't wear his official robe today. He only wore his daily clothes. It looked even more difficult to associate him with the governor of Jinling. Everyone found a seat and sat down. Yang Mingji ordered a servant to pour tea. "Niao niao." Yanni held the teacup and looked up at Yang Mingji. He asked, "If you have something to say, just say it. There are no outsiders here. You asked someone to tell us that you have something important to tell us. What is it?" Yang Mingji was silent for a moment. He then said, "I heard that you came from the Rendezvous." "What? My name has reached your ears?" He said proudly. "Indeed, we came from the Rendezvous. If I didn't arrive with reinforcements, the people in the Rendezvous would have been killed by the Yudo. You don't know how critical the situation was at that time. When we arrived, the Rendezvous City's army had already started to eat people." Speaking up to here, A trace of disgust flashed in Yanhe's eyes. How dare they? Once Yanhe started talking about his contributions, he would not stop talking. Yang Mingji obviously didn't want to listen to him show off. He interrupted him. Military Governor Xiao, you were there during the Battle of Jiang and the Battle of the Rendezvous. You interacted with the Yudo. What do you think of them? Xiao Ju, nothing much. His expression was calm. He Yin quickly explained, I happened to be there during the Battle of Jiang and the Battle of the Rendezvous. Official Yang, those Yudo were very cruel. They came prepared. Their methods were cunning. They massacred the citizens of Dawei outside the Rendezvous. They were very despicable. Yang Mingji looked at her and asked, do they have intentions to invade Dawei's territory? Yin, it's obvious. Yang Mingji nodded. I think so too. Everyone in the world thinks so. Lin Shuang has said. Isn't that the case? The imperial court doesn't think so. Everyone was stunned and looked at Yang Mingji. Yang Mingji frowned. His expression was very solemn. I received news that the Yudo emissaries are on their way to Shuo capital. The two factions in the imperial court are arguing endlessly. His Majesty wants to make peace. He's crazy. Before Yang Mingji could finish, Yanhe shouted, they're already at our doorstep. How can we make peace? Do they think that Buddha has descended to save all living beings? Yang Mingji shook his head. Not only that, they propose to set up a market in Dawei's territory so that the two countries can exchange trade. Chapter 192. The moment he said this, no one in the room said anything. Even Lin Shuanghe, who had never cared about the affairs of the state, looked puzzled when he heard this. After all, the enemy had led their troops to invade and suffer defeat, yet the emperor was still thinking for them. It sounded like a joke. Right now, in the imperial court, the crown prince, Prime Minister Su, and the civil officials are mostly in favor of peace. The generals have yet to express their opinions. Yang Mingji looked at Xiao Ju. I want to ask you, what are you going to do? Do you even need to ask? Yanhe said, we are not weak. If someone slaps us in the face, why should we let them slap us in the face? I will chase the Yudo back home and make sure they don't dare to step into Dawei in the future. Then I can rest assured. Yang Mingji said in a low voice, it's just that. I don't know if your words can change the emperor's mind. After talking about the recent movements of the Yudo, everyone got up and left their seats. Because of the news sent by Yang Mingji, Xiao Ju and the others didn't plan to stay in Jinling for another 2 days. Since the Yudo emissary was already on his way to Shuojing, they had to hurry back to Shuojing to meet the emperor. Right now, Shuojing was mostly under Prime Minister Su. Even if they weren't under Prime Minister Su, they were still suppressed and didn't dare to speak. If they really agreed to the Yudo's request for peace and even set up a battlefield in Dawei, it would only be harmful to the people of Dawei. After regrouping the troops, everyone had lunch and was about to set off. Xiao Ju and He Yin rode at the front with the troops. He Yin and Lin Shuanghe sat in a carriage. Chu Zhao and Ing Xiang's carriage was at the back. Between the two horses riding side by side, Xiao Ju opened his mouth and said, have you seen He Rufei after the Xianchong mansion? And he paused and said, I'm not familiar with him. I've only seen him a few times after he was made a general, but I only saw him from afar. However, ever since he was made a general, other than the battle in Huayuan, have you ever seen him lead an army? I think he's been living a comfortable life for too long. That's why he's so weak in the battle of Huayuan. Why are you asking him? You want to catch up with him? Xiao Ju did not answer his question. She continued to ask, He Rufei that you met later, what was the difference between him and the past? What's the difference? Yanhe frowned. How would I know? I wasn't following him the whole time. However, he had grown a little over the years and was a little taller than before. Before I went to Ling County, I heard that the He family had the intention to marry a wife for him. Xiao Huaijin. He glanced at his companion beside him. If He Rufei marries a wife before you, you won't lose to He Rufei, right? Xiao Ju couldn't be bothered to pay attention to him and rode off. He Yin, who was in the horse carriage, did not know that Xiao Ju and Yin he had such a conversation. The closer she got to Shuojing, the heavier her worries became. Lin Shuanghe also noticed it. He sat opposite her and asked, Younger sister He, What's wrong with you? When I saw you in the Rendezvous, I felt that something was wrong. It was as if you had something on your mind. You didn't even talk much these days. What kind of trouble did you encounter? If you have any difficulties, just tell me. I'll help you think of a solution. Yin smiled bitterly. She was only thinking about how to expose He Rufei when she returned to Shuo Jing. Now that she had become Mu and Lang, her identity was closer to the He family and Su family than her previous identity as the military officer's daughter. However, the official position of Mu and Lang had many restrictions. He Rufei's trusted aides who could prove the truth were all killed by He Rufei. It was difficult to get a witness, so she could only start from another place. The Su family was the one who kept this secret. If she could start from the Su family would pull the He family out to protect themselves. They would panic. An alliance formed for benefits would not be stable. He Yin was deep in thought when Lin Shuanghe suddenly stretched out his hand in front of her. Younger sister, He Yin looked at him and said, I'm thinking about what I should do when I return to the capital. She counted with her fingers. Brother Lin, you know that I escaped from Shuo Jing and got involved in a lawsuit. Everyone in the neighborhood knows that I'm a woman. Now is not the time to swagger back. I'm afraid that I can only see my father and brother secretly. She thought for a moment. When His Majesty conferred the title, I left some money. It's enough to rent a small house, but it's inconvenient for me to show my face. If Brother Lin has a lot of connections, can you help me arrange it? I'll naturally give you the money without missing a single cent. Lin Shuanghe heard her words and slapped his thigh. I thought it was some trouble. It's a small matter. Leave it to me. He lifted the curtain of the carriage and shouted, Huaijin, Huaijin. Xiao Zhu paused and slowed down his pace. He rode his horse back to the front of the carriage and asked, What's the matter? Lin Shuanghe smiled at him. I just promised Brother He that when I return to Shuo Jing, I'll rent a house for him in the city. But you also know that renting a house is not something that can be done overnight. Before we find a good residence, can Brother He stay in your residence? Xiao family's courtyard is big and spacious. It shouldn't be difficult to give a room to Brother He, right? He had never thought that Lin Shuanghe would say this. He hurriedly said, Brother Lin, that's not what you said just now. Governor, it's okay. I'll just find an outside. Staying in it costs more money. Lin Shuanghe said, You're still so young. How can you be so extravagant? Don't you know the benefits of being thrifty? Listen to me and stay in Huaijin's house. Huaijin, can you give me a definite answer? Xiao Zhu glanced at He Yin. He Yin's body stiffened. He saw Xiao Zhu lightly nod his head. Okay. He Yin, after saying this, Xiao Zhu rode his horse forward. Lin Shuanghe lowered the curtain of the carriage and looked at He Yin proudly. See, now isn't it the best of both worlds? He Yin leaned weakly against the carriage. He thought to himself, this is really an ill-fated relationship. Not only did they not keep their distance, but they were getting closer and closer. They were even living in Xiao Zhu's house. Although living in Xiao Zhu's house did have its benefits. If she followed Xiao Zhu on various occasions, she might have a higher chance of meeting Su Zhiheng and He Rufei. She might even be able to find some useful clues. She suppressed the almost imperceptible joy in her heart and coughed lightly. In her heart, she secretly said to herself, it must be like this. In the Shuo capital, the Su family study room. A servant was guarding the door. Someone was talking inside. Two people were sitting in front of a small table. One of them was wearing a green robe and looked refined. The other was also a handsome young master. However, there was a reserved and deep aura between his eyebrows. The two of them were looking at the chessboard in front of them. The black and white pieces on the chessboard were scattered all over. It looked like a chaotic game. These two people, one of them was the eldest son of the Su family, the current Hamlin Academy scholar Su Zhiying. The other person was He Rufei, who had just returned to the capital not long ago. He had defeated Yudo at Huayuan. Second young master Xiao is about to return to the capital. Su Zhiheng placed down a piece. After Gai Zhonglong and second young master Xiao return to the capital, they will definitely speak to His Majesty and advocate that Yudo be chased out of the way. He Rufei didn't speak. He silently looked at the chessboard. Brother He, Are you still thinking about the Hua Yuan incident? Su Zhiheng smiled faintly. Those who are no longer in this world. Brother He, don't worry. There won't be anyone else in this world who knows this secret. Even if there are people who know, they won't have any evidence. They won't be able to turn the tables. He Rufei glanced at him. Young master, Su seems to be too relaxed. Don't forget, when you were studying at Xianchang Academy, Xiao Huijin, Yinnang Guang, and even Lin Shuanghe all saw He Rufei. So what? Su Zhiheng said disapprovingly. When He Rufei was young, he wasn't very close to his classmates. If he was really close, his classmates wouldn't have been able to discover his identity for so many years. I think, brother, he is worrying too much. Even if Xiao Huijin and Yin Nangguang return to Shua Jing, you won't have much interaction with them. He Rufei placed a piece down. I hope so. In his heart, he suddenly remembered the nightmare he had last night. In his dream, he was leading troops to fight on the battlefield in Huayuan. Suddenly, a sword stabbed him from behind. He couldn't dodge in time and was stabbed in the heart. When he fell, he saw someone walk in front of him and squat down. It was a young man wearing a mask and armor. When he slowly reached out and took off his mask, a familiar, beautiful, and heroic face was revealed. He Yin smiled at him and softly said, "Big brother." He Rufei suddenly woke up. He touched his forehead and found that it was covered in cold sweat. He Yin had clearly been dead for more than a year. This name had gradually been forgotten by the world. Or it could be said that she had never been remembered by the world. The days had passed peacefully for so long, but at this juncture, she would still appear in his dreams and cause him to be unable to sleep at night. "That concubine of yours," he said. Su Zhiheng's face turned cold. "She's already dead." He Yan had died at the hands of He Wanru. A month after He Yan's death, he had casually found an excuse to have He Wanru killed. The corpse had been dragged to the mass grave. He was afraid that it had already been eaten by wolves and wild dogs. In the future, if by any chance they found out something, they could push all the blame onto He Wanru. All the thugs, servants, and maids who had been involved that day were dealt with. The entire Su family, inside and outside, had been changed. He had been a general when he was alive. After his death, he had used so many servants to accompany her. This could be considered to have completed the friendship between husband and wife. "Very good," He Rufei said coldly. "Don't make any mistakes." Just as they were talking, someone knocked on the door of the study. Su Zhiheng got up to open the door. A young woman walked in. This woman was also in the prime of her youth. If one looked carefully, there were some similarities between her eyebrows and He Yan's. It was just that she didn't have the heroic spirit and determination of a female general on the battlefield. Instead, she was more beautiful and sweet, like the delicate spring flowers in the capital. Her every movement was spoiled and lovable. This was Su Zhiheng's new wife, the current Su eldest madam. He Xining was He Yuanqing's second legitimate daughter, He Rufei's cousin, and He Yan's biological sister. Eldest brother, husband, Xining had the kitchen make some snacks while you were talking inside. He Xining smiled as she placed a few plates of shortbread on the small table. She said that if you're tired, you can fill your stomach. You've worked hard. Su Zhiheng spoke warmly and pulled her to sit beside him. "Sit down, too." He Xining obeyed and sat down beside Su Zhiheng. She looked at He Rufei and smiled. "Eldest brother, you haven't come to the Su family for a while. How are father and mother?" He Rufei nodded slightly. "They're fine. You don't have to worry." He Xining didn't know what to say. She and this cousin of hers weren't very close in the past. He Rufei's temperament was particularly unsociable when he was young, and he often wore a mask. The He family all knew that He Rufei wore a mask because he was ugly. He Xining saw He Rufei hiding alone in the corner during the He family's banquets every day. He Xining pitied him, but when she tried to get close to him a few times, He Rufei would avoid her as if she was the plague. After a while, He Xining's feelings faded. Later, He Rufei betrayed the He family and joined the army. He actually managed to earn some military merits. All of the He family's unmarried young ladies also rose in status, including He Xining's older sister, the He family's second branch, who was notoriously sickly. When He Yin returned to the He family, He Xining was already very old. At that time, Because of He Rufei, the He family arranged a good marriage for He Yin. The Su family's eldest son, Su Jiheng, was already a Hamlin scholar at a young age. He was also handsome and refined. He Xining had once been jealous of this older sister of his. She was clearly in poor health and hadn't returned to the capital for many years. Even the noble ladies in the capital didn't know of her existence. But as soon as she came back, she was able to become the Su family's young mistress. What kind of blessing was this? But this bit of jealousy disappeared after He Yin died. He Xining felt sad for He Yin. Even though she didn't have any feelings for this older sister of hers, blood was still thicker than water. She had just found a good marriage and was about to enjoy life, but her life was so short. What was strange was that after He Yin died, the He family and Su family held a large funeral for her. The entire Shuo capital knew that the He family valued this second branch's daughter, but only He Xining knew that in the He family, other than her own mother, everyone, including her own father, didn't seem as sad as others thought. After the funeral, other than occasionally wiping away a few drops of tears when He Yin was mentioned in public, normally, no one in the residence would even mention He Yin. It was as if the He family's second branch's daughter had never existed. He Xining felt that something wasn't right, but before she could figure out why her family was so cold to her older sister, He Yuanqing actually decided on her marriage with Su Jiheng and wanted her to be Su Jiheng's second wife. Even though Su Jiheng was a widower, he was still a good candidate for a husband in the hearts of others in the Shuo capital. Especially after He Yin died, the affection he showed made many young ladies admire him. Even though He Xining knew that Su Jiheng was outstanding, she was extremely unwilling to marry into the Su family. Older sisters serving the same husband wasn't a new thing in the Shuo capital. But most of the time, the D daughter would be the main wife, and the Shu daughter would be the concubine, taking care of each other. How could two D daughters marry the same person one after the other? It wasn't like the He family's young ladies couldn't get married. She was so young and beautiful, and her family background was good. Wouldn't it be better to find a young master of equal social status to be the main wife than to be the Su family's young mistress? But on this matter, He Yuan Liang, who had always doted on her, was unexpectedly very firm. And her mother, second Madam He, wanted to fight for her, but she was powerless. In the He family, women's words didn't count. Just like that, He Xining unwillingly married into the Su family. After marrying into the Su family, He Xining discovered that Su Jiheng was more considerate and gentle than she had imagined. It was very easy to fall for a handsome and outstanding husband who took care of her in everything. Moreover, Su Jiheng was indeed very popular with women. The regret and longing he occasionally showed for his deceased wife made people think that this person was someone who valued friendship and was worthy of being entrusted with the rest of their lives. After He Xining married into the Su family, He Rufei, her older cousin, would come to see her from time to time. He Xining was a bit overwhelmed by the favor. She should be the one who married the best out of all the young ladies of the He family. She enjoyed all the blessings that He Yin didn't enjoy. It was just that sometimes it felt unreal. That's right, eldest brother, husband, He Xining said. Previously, every autumn, I would go up the mountain with mother to the temple to burn incense and pray for blessings. Although I won't be at home this year, I still want to go with mother. Su Jiheng smiled and said, naturally, if I don't have anything to do that day, I'll go with you. He Xining happily said, that's really great. After sitting for a while, she got up and left the room, leaving Su Jiheng and He Rufei to talk inside. After leaving the room, her personal maid, Xiao Lu, asked, young mistress, are we going back to the courtyard? He Xining shook her head. Let's go. In the courtyard, the summer pond was lush and green, and the pond water was as calm as a mirror. The He family's pond was always planted with many lotus flowers. At this time of the year, a faint fragrance wafted through the air. However, the Su family's pond didn't even have a rockery, let alone lotus flowers. Su Jiheng was an elegant person. Only this pond was like a pool of stagnant water. After looking at it for a long time, it felt like a bottomless abyss that could pull people down at any time. Her older sister, He Yin, had lost her footing and drowned here. Perhaps it was because of this, or perhaps it was because of their blood relationship, but every time she walked here, she always felt that the wind was particularly cold, and the water was especially cold. It made her heart feel uncomfortable. Yixing looked away. The dowry maid, Xiao Lu, asked her, "Young mistress, when you were in the room earlier, why didn't you stay a little longer? The longer you stayed, the better the Su family would treat you." Yixing also understood that the Su family's master and madam were so lenient to her, their daughter-in-law, most likely because of He Fei. The closer she was to this General Fei Hong, brother and sister, the more the Su family didn't dare to treat her poorly. Yixing shook her head and laughed self-deprecatingly. Big brother originally didn't come to see me. It didn't matter how long I stayed in there. If there was someone who knew Yin here, they would discover that on this soft and sweet face, there was a clear and bright look in her eyes. It was very similar to the previous young Mistress Su. She was just deceiving herself. In less than a month, they traveled from Jinling to Shuajing. Along the way, they rested well and hurried along the way. Finally, they arrived in front of the city gates before the beginning of autumn. In front of Shuajing's gates, the guards who had received the news had already opened the gates. The soldiers and horses entered the city, and the common people along the street all pointed at the troops and whispered. Yin and Lin Shuanghe hid in the carriage and didn't accept these comments. Lin Shuanghe's heart itched unbearably. He said to Yin, "If I knew it would be so impressive, I would have asked Huijin to give me a horse. If I sat on the horse, the girls would be able to see my face more clearly." "Even if you don't sit on the horse, Brother Lin, the girls in Shuajing will be able to see your face very clearly." Yin comforted him. "That's true." Lin Shuanghe heard her say this and thought about it carefully. He didn't feel conflicted anymore. Yin himself didn't think too much about the matter of being in the limelight. That year, when she returned to the capital with the victorious Fuyue army, it was also as lively as today. However, at that time, she was wearing a mask and was extremely uncomfortable. She was afraid that people would find out. The next day, after returning to the He family, the real He Fei accepted all the glory and burdens in her place. She had never used her own face to face all the things that General Fei Hong brought to her. The carriage stopped with a squeak, and Yin He's voice came from outside. "How long are you guys going to sit inside? We're almost at the entrance of the palace." Yin was startled and dismounted with Lin Shuanghe. Chu Zhao had already parted ways with their carriage when he entered the city. He only needed a servant to inform him. Yin didn't mind. They weren't on the same side, so it was natural for them to split up. It couldn't be that if she moved into the Xiaofu, Chu Zhao would also move into the Xiaofu, right? "Commander-in-Chief, we are going to..." Yin asked. "I want to enter the palace." Xiao Ju glanced at her. "You wait in the carriage first." "Wait." And he looked at her in confusion. "Why don't you bring this fellow with you?" "When entering the palace, one must meet the emperor. Take this opportunity to let the emperor get to know this fellow. It will be beneficial for his career in the future. Since you are someone superior, you should find every opportunity to praise your subordinate. Or are you afraid that Yin will be more successful than you in the future, so you deliberately don't let him stand out?" Yin was sincerely convinced by Yin He. No matter how many possibilities there were, he could always think of the most boring one. Now is not the time. Xiao Ju was too lazy to explain to Yin. She looked at him and asked him with rare patience, "Are you okay being here alone?" Yin smiled. "What problem can I have? Commander-in-Chief, don't worry. I'll just sleep in the carriage." Lin Shuanghe sensed something and poked his head out. "Huijin, you mean I also have to enter the palace?" Xiao Ju looked at him coldly. Lin Shuanghe coughed lightly. "Excuse me, can I not go?" "You can't." Xiao Ju sneered. "Although I wrote a letter to invite you to Liangzhou, you didn't tell anyone in the Lin family before you left. Imperial Physician Lin sent a bunch of urgent letters to my account to find someone. Do you want to read them now?" Lin Shuanghe smiled awkwardly. I thought that you must be looking for me in an urgent situation. When people are anxious, their brains don't work well. I forgot. Yes, I forgot to tell my family." And he crossed his arms in front of his chest and said coldly, "Aren't you his good friend? You won't die if you take the blame for him." Lin Shuanghe was very touched. Brother Nanguang, I've known you for so many years. Finally, I've heard such word from you. Shut up. Xiao Zhu frowned slightly impatiently. Lin Xuanhe immediately stopped talking. After he got down from the carriage, Xiao Zhu was about to leave with him. Suddenly, he remembered something and walked to the carriage. He Yin lifted the curtain of the carriage and looked at him. Stay here and don't run around. There are many people outside the palace, Xiao Zhu reminded her. He paused, and his tone became gentler. When I leave the palace, I'll take you home. Chapter 193. Xiao Zhu and the other two followed the servant into the palace. He Yin sat alone in the carriage. When he heard Xiao Zhu say, take you home, even though he knew that Xiao Zhu was just saying it casually, the person who heard it felt dizzy. He buried his head in his face and felt like he was floating. She didn't know what home was. Although the He family in her previous life was a home, they never gave her affection and warmth. The Su family was also a home, but they pushed her into the cold water. The other He family in this life finally gave her some attachment and warmth to live in this world. However, before the matter was settled, she couldn't rashly meet with them. Thinking of this, Hian's joy gradually calmed down. She had to find a way to go back and see Yun Sheng and He Sui. She had been gone for more than a year. He Sui and Yun Sheng must be very worried. Back when she was in the Liangzhou Guards, Yin had secretly given Fei Nu money and begged Fei Nu to find a way to send a message to He Sui to tell her that she was safe. When he went to Jiang and the war in Yuchuo started, he forgot about this matter. It had been a while since he sent a letter to He Sui and the others. He Sui and the others must be worried sick. She had to find a way to go to the Su family. It was a little difficult to start with He Rufei. She had to start with the Su family. He Yin was killed. From beginning to end, Su Zhiheng and He Rufei didn't directly show their faces. She died at He Wanru's hands. With Su Zhiheng's temperament, he would definitely kill He Wanru to silence her. Perhaps everyone present on that day couldn't escape the word death. But was there no smart person in the Su family? Just like Chai Anshi in the Battle of Mingshui, there might be a fish that escaped the net in the Su family's courtyard. That was her chance. She had to first prove that there was something wrong with Su Zhiheng's death. Only then could she peel back the layers of silk and reveal the He family's biggest sinister secret. He Yin carefully thought about his future plans after returning to Shuajing. Unknowingly, the sky gradually darkened. When the lanterns in front of the palace gate lit up, a familiar figure walked out. Only Xiao Zhu and He Yin came out. Lin Xuanhe was nowhere to be seen. He Yin asked curiously, where is Brother Lin? Imperial Physician Lin is in the palace. He won't be leaving for now. Xiao Zhu answered and looked at Yanhe. Don't look at me. I'm going back now. And he ordered a servant to lead the horse. Qingxiu is still waiting for me at home. He seemed to be particularly proud of the fact that someone was waiting for him. You are all alone. Of course, you don't care about these things. Finishing, he flipped onto the horse and said, let's go. He swaggered off. To be honest, He Yin used to think that Yanhe was obstinate and self-opinionated. Every day, he was like a cockfight. Whenever he saw an outstanding talent, he would compete with them. His life was too hard. Now, seeing him leave with a face full of smiles, she actually felt a trace of envy. It was probably a happy thing to have someone waiting for you at home after a long journey. She was lost in thought as she looked at Yanhe's back. Suddenly, she heard Xiao Zhu's voice. Why aren't you getting in? He Yin hurriedly shrank back into the carriage. Fei Nu and Qi Wu were driving the carriage outside. He Yin and Xiao Zhu sat in the carriage. From the Rendezvous to Shuajing, the journey was very lively. Yin Nongguang, Lin Xuanhe, Xiao Zhu, and He Yin were all former schoolmates. When they were together, they could even play leaf cards at a table. She didn't feel it when they were noisy. Now that everyone had dispersed, only she and Xiao Zhu were in the carriage. The atmosphere was quiet, and she felt somewhat uneasy. What are you nervous about? Xiao Zhu leaned against the carriage and asked casually. He had almost choked on her own saliva. After hesitating for a long time, she squeezed out a sentence. I haven't been to your house before. It's my first time coming here empty-handed. I just feel a little apologetic. Speaking of this, Hien really thought of this matter. She asked Xiao Ju, Commander-in-Chief, why don't we buy some snacks and cloth for your family as gifts when we pass by the goods store later? Xiao Ju stared into her eyes and pursed her lips. Are you going to propose marriage? Is it your first time coming here as a gift? Don't we need to? Hien asked. I haven't been to other people's residences before. I don't know what to do when I'm a guest for the first time. In the past, when she was He Rufei, the He family was afraid that she would be exposed. They didn't even make friends, let alone visit other people's residences. In this life, Hien didn't even have time to understand how ordinary people made friends before she went straight to the army camp. Her seriousness made Xiao Ju speechless for a moment. She pushed her head away. There's no need. Just do whatever you want. Commander-in-Chief, don't you have eldest young Master Xiao and eldest young Mistress Xiao at home? Hien recalled what Lin Shuanghe had said earlier and said, it said that eldest young Master Xiao is the #1 dream lover of all women in Dawei. Is that true? Rumor has it that he is very gentle and never mistreats his subordinates. He is a gentleman who is upright and gentle. Is that true? Xiao Ju said calmly. You want to be my sister-in-law? How is that possible? Hien immediately denied it. She wasn't Song Tao Dao. She wasn't interested in having a brother-in-law like Xiao Ju. I'm just curious. Also, eldest young Mistress Xiao, how is she? Is she easy to get along with? Hien hesitated for a moment. It's better if it's a man, but I don't know how to deal with a woman. What does she like and dislike? Is she lively or reserved? How do I talk to her to make her happy? Xiao Ju restrained herself and said calmly, if you make her happy, my big brother will be in trouble. Hien said, oh. She returned to her seat, as if she was still thinking about this matter. Xiao Ju raised her eyebrows slightly. Hien seemed to be very interested in the matter of being a guest. That kind of excitement and nervousness was like a young child receiving an invitation to go to a friend's house for the first time. He was at a loss and afraid of making a mistake, but he was also faintly happy and expectant. He Sui only had one son and one daughter. Compared to his son, his daughter, who looked very similar to his late wife, was obviously more favored by this military officer. According to the information that Wanning had gathered, Hien used to be arrogant and unreasonable. Sometimes she was vain. Although this could be a fox's disguise, the neighbors near the He family said that Hien still had some sisters, even if their relationship wasn't very good. But why did he have this kind of expression? Xiao Ju could clearly see Hien's inner emotions and contradictions, but she couldn't see the reason for it. Hien always seemed to be shrouded in a thick layer of fog, making many of her actions inexplicable. However, the more mysterious she was, the more people would be attracted to her. Otherwise, being alone in the thick fog would always make people feel sorry for her. While she was thinking, the carriage stopped in front of the Xiao mansion. Fei Nu and Qi Wu dismounted. Before Xiao Ju and Hien got off the carriage, they heard an excited voice from outside. Young mistress, young master, second young master is back. Immediately after, there was a burst of noise from inside the mansion. It seemed that someone was coming. Hien had just gotten off the carriage with Xiao Ju when the Xiao family's door opened. Several people walked out from inside. Walking at the front was a young couple. The man wore a round-neck brocade robe with a sky-blue color. He really looked elegant and refined. The woman next to him was beautiful. Her eyebrows were moving. Her snow-white dress outlined her graceful figure. She was like a white pear tree. This was Xiao Ju's eldest brother, Xiao Jing, and his wife, by Rong Wei. Hien had heard of this couple's name before, but seeing them in person was better than hearing 100 times. When these two people stood together, it was very pleasing to the eye. The Xiao family was really a place where beauties came from. Each and every one of them was so beautiful. Hien thought that when she stepped into the Xiao family's mansion, she didn't know if it would be considered a hindrance to the appearance of the Xiao family. Huaijin, you're finally back. Bai Rong smiled. Your eldest brother has been thinking about you every day since a month ago. Today, when he got off work, he waited in the mansion. He was afraid that you wouldn't be able to make it back to Shuo Jing tonight. It just so happened that you made it back in time. Xiao Jing also smiled. When he smiled, he revealed a pair of small canine teeth. It added a touch of cuteness to his gentlemanly gentleness. It's good that you're back. Wei personally cooked some food. It's still warm. We're just waiting for you. Fei Nu and Qi Wu also eat. You guys took care of Huijin along the way. It's been hard on you. Fei Nu and Qi Wu repeatedly said that they didn't dare to. Xiao Zhu turned to look at He Yin. He Yin stood 3 steps away from him. He was very respectful and polite. He said, "Come here." He Yin followed his instructions and went forward. Xiao Jing and Wei looked at each other. They also saw clearly that this young master and Xiao Zhu came down from the carriage together. If it was a subordinate, he would probably be riding a horse outside like Fei Nu and Qi Wu. Moreover, Xiao Zhu wasn't a person who liked to interact with others. Sharing a carriage was already considered very close. Xiao Jing asked, "Huijin, this young master is my friend He Yin," Xiao Zhu said. He Yin bowed and said, "Young Master Xiao, madam." After saying that, he couldn't help but secretly look at Xiao Zhu. He thought that Xiao Zhu would say that he was a subordinate. She didn't expect him to be a friend. This time, Xiao Jing and Wei were somewhat surprised. Wei came back to her senses and said with a smile, "So he's Huijin's friend. This is strange. In all these years, other than young Master Lin, I've never seen Huijin bring a friend to the residence. Is young Master he a new friend that Huijin made in the Liang Province Guard?" Before He Yin could answer, Xiao Zhu said, "Sister-in-law, let's talk inside." "Okay." Wei smiled and looked at Xiao Jing with some confusion. Xiao Jing replied to her with a confused expression. Not only did Xiao Zhu bring a friend to the residence, but she also seemed to be very protective of this friend. The husband and wife were curious about He Yan's identity. Could he be a relative of the imperial family? Why did she care so much about him? But was there such a person in the capital? Moreover, Xiao Zhu didn't have a good temper towards the imperial family. They didn't understand. The group arrived at the Xiao family's hall. He Yin and Xiao Zhu went to wash their hands first. The hall was brightly lit, and the room was filled with the aroma of food. On the long table, there were all kinds of dishes. He Yin and Xiao Zhu sat down at the table. Fei Nu and Qi Wu were also called by Wei to bring 2 stools to the side. He Yin's heart skipped a beat. Just like the rumors said, young Master Xiao treated his servants very well. If this was the original He family, he would have been reprimanded by Madame He for not following the rules. The dishes were all home-cooked dishes. They weren't extravagant, but they were exquisite and delicious. He Yin was inexplicably nervous. He picked up his chopsticks and ate in small bites, following Xiao Zhu's movements. Xiao family didn't have a rule of don't talk while eating. Even Xiao Jing, who looked gentle and proper, became a chatterbox at the dinner table. He kept asking Xiao Zhu how she had been this year. "You didn't tell us about what happened in Jiang," Rong smiled and said. "Later, when the news reached the capital, we found out that the situation was critical. I know you were afraid that Ruby would be worried, but in the future, don't take responsibility for this kind of thing. After Ruby found out about this, if I didn't stop him, I'm afraid he would have gone to Liangzhou to find you." Xiao Jing coughed softly. "I'm also concerned about Huijin, but..." His gaze fell on He Yin. "I heard that when you were in Jiang, one of your subordinates made contributions with you and even received a reward from His Majesty. Could it be this young master?" "That's me," He Yin replied shyly. "It's all thanks to the governor's praise. In fact, I didn't do anything." Xiao Zhu said calmly. "The one who praised you was Chu Xilan, not me." He Yin, "At this time, there was no need to be so clear." Xiao Jing seemed to have noticed something and shook his head with a smile. "Young master, Huijin doesn't know how to speak. Don't be angry. However, this is the first time he has brought a friend to your residence as a guest. It can be seen that he really wants to be on good terms with you." He Yin stammered and was about to speak. "She's not here as a guest," Xiao Zhu interrupted him. "She's going to stay here for a while." Xiao Jing and Wei paused. "I won't hide it from the 2 of you. This one has already asked people to look for a suitable residence in Shuo City. However, I'm afraid it will be difficult to find one in a short period of time. The governor is kind and is willing to let me stay here for a few days. Once the residence is settled, I will immediately move out." Ian was slightly embarrassed. I'll have to trouble young master and madam for the next few days. Byron Wei smiled and said warmly, Young master, you don't have to be so polite. Since you are Huijin's friend, you are also our friend. It is not easy to find a residence in the city. Young master, please treat this place as your own home. You can stay for as long as you want. Ian gratefully agreed. He didn't know how the Shao family found a daughter-in-law. Among the young madams of the large families, Byron Wei's personality was the best. It seemed that only someone with such a personality would be a good match for Shao Jing. He heard that Byron Wei was a concubine's daughter. When the news of Shao Jing's marriage was announced, the entire Shuo city was saying that Byron Wei's status was not good enough for Shao Jing. However, Ian felt that Shao Jing had good taste. Eat, Shao Ju said and placed a folded milk skin in front of her. Ian quickly lowered his head and ate. Just by looking at her appearance, one couldn't tell that Shao Jing was a chatterbox. Throughout the meal, Shao Jing was the only one talking nonstop. She asked about this and that, even asking about how many blankets Shao Ju used in Liangzhou's winter. If it wasn't for Byron Wei pulling him back, he would have talked even longer. Was this the feeling of being a family? Ian looked at them and felt a trace of envy in his heart. After the meal, Byron Wei stood up and said, We have instructed the servants to clean the rooms in Huijin every day. Just now, I've already sent someone to boil some hot water. After the servants in Huijin clean up the rooms, you can rest early tonight. You must have had a long journey, so rest well. If there's anything else, you can talk about it tomorrow after you've had enough sleep. She then looked at Ian. There are empty rooms and courtyards in the residence. Just now, when we were halfway through the meal, I had the servants clean them up. There's no one else in the courtyard other than the two servants. Young master, you can rest assured. When Ian heard this, he felt that Byron Wei was very considerate. He was about to thank her when Shao Ju said, No need. Everyone looked at him. There's an empty room in my courtyard. She can stay in my courtyard. Shao Ju said, Cough, cough, cough. Chi Wu, who was walking at the back, coughed. Byron Wei and Shao Ju didn't think of anything else. They were just a little surprised. However, Shao Ju quickly smiled and said, If that's the case, that's fine. If you stay in the same courtyard, it'll be more convenient for you to discuss anything. Chi Wu's face was filled with despair. Since Shao Ju had made the decision, Ian had no reason to object. After Byron Wei and Shao Jing left, she followed Shao Ju to his courtyard. On the way, she asked quietly, Commander-in-Chief, why do I have to stay in the same courtyard as you? They weren't in the Liangzhou Guard, nor were they in Jiang. There were so many rooms. Between men and women, it was better to be careful. Shao Ju glanced at her. Do you really want your identity to be exposed? Ian was stunned. There are no other servants in my courtyard. Ian understood and thought that it made sense. If they stayed in another courtyard, it was inevitable that they would be exposed. If they were discovered by the servants of Shao family, it wouldn't be a good thing. Living in Shao Ju's courtyard was peaceful and quiet. Shao Ju's courtyard was in the middle of the residence. It was spacious and bright. It wasn't as elegant and simple as Yang Mingji's residence, nor was it as luxurious and extravagant as Cui Yueji's residence. It was probably because no one had lived here for a long time that it felt empty and cold. Although it was clean and tidy when they walked in, they didn't feel hot even though it was summer. Instead, they felt a little cold. After passing through the flower wall, they arrived at the main building. Next to the main building was a pomegranate tree with extremely small fruits hanging from the branches. They swayed back and forth like lanterns the size of half a fist. It was very cute. This is your courtyard? Ian turned to look at him. Commander-in-Chief, did you live here when you were young? She stood under the tree and coincidentally had a fruit hanging from her head. It looked like a string of gourds. Shao Ju found it funny and replied, No, I didn't live in the residence when I was young. I lived here when I was in my teens. Ian vaguely heard that Shao Ju used to live on the mountain. It was said that Shao Zhongwu had invited a famous master to teach him martial arts on the mountain. Thinking about it this way, Shao Ju was more pitiful than him. Although she couldn't call her biological parents father and mother, they lived in the same residence and would see each other often. Xiao Ju was a child living on the mountain. Xiao Zhongwu couldn't go up the mountain to visit him all the time. He was all alone and pitiful. Ian wanted to cheer him up. He turned a point at the lowest pomegranate and asked, "Wait a few more days. Will you be able to eat this? Have you eaten the pomegranates on this tree before? Is it sweet? You only want to eat?" Xiao Ju raised his eyebrows. "It's very sour. You must be lying to me." Ian disagreed. "If it's very sour, you would have cut this tree down a long time ago. Why did you leave it here for so long?" Xiao Ju sneered. "Not everyone plants trees to eat. What's the difference between planting a tree and planting grass if it's not for eating?" Ian raised his head and looked at the highest pomegranate on the tree. This pomegranate was probably the biggest one on the tree. Ian reached out to grab it, but the branch was too tall. She jumped and tried to grab it, but she still couldn't reach it. The next moment, someone stood behind her and reached out to pull the pomegranate branch to a place where she could reach it. Ian's body stiffened. He subconsciously turned around and almost sprained his ankle. Xiao Ju grabbed his arm and pulled him up. He looked down and asked, "You can't even walk?" Ian coughed loudly. "I can't stand properly. You're not plucking it anymore." Xiao Ju gestured to Yin to look at the branch in her hand. "No, I'm not plucking it anymore." Yin explained, "I don't want to pluck it. It's not ripe yet. I'll pluck it when it's ripe. It'll be sweeter." She herself didn't know what nonsense she was spouting. She only felt her entire body tense up when she met that pair of limpid eyes. Yin immediately turned around and said loudly, "Which room am I staying in? I want to go and wash up first." Xiao Ju pointed to a room. Yin immediately rushed into the room as if there was a ghost chasing after him. Immediately after, the entire courtyard only heard a bang sound as her door was closed. Xiao Ju. He stood in place and stared at Yan's room door. Not long after, he looked at the pomegranate tree in front of him and smiled. In the distance, Qi Wu and Fei Nu were huddled at the door of the courtyard. They didn't know whether to enter or not. Fortunately, as long as Xiao Ju returned to the residence, all the servants in the courtyard would be chased out. They wouldn't have to see such an embarrassing scene. Qi Wu said with a trembling voice, "They don't speak." Fei Nu interrupted him. "How can I not speak?" Qi Wu lowered his voice and couldn't hide the anger and grief on his face. It was fine when he was with the Liangzhou guards in Jiang, but now that he's back in Shuajing, he's actually so brazen. Is that Ian crazy? Fei Nu wanted to say something, but stopped. I know that when he was in Jiang, he disguised himself as a woman. However, he wasn't a real woman after all. Eldest young master and young madam don't know about this yet. What if they do? Fei Nu tried to comfort his anxious companion. "You're overthinking this matter. It's actually not that serious." "What do you know?" Qi Wu said. "Young master has ordered us to investigate Yan's matter every few days. It's clear that Yan's background isn't clean. Otherwise, why would it be like this? If he's honest and clean, I'll accept it." Qi Wu's voice was choked with emotion. If he approached young master with ulterior motives, with young master's current concern for him, I'm afraid he's more concerned than the Su family's Hanlon scholar whose wife died. Fei Nu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. His words reminded him of another matter. He said in a low voice, "Speaking of which, young master has returned to the capital. Wan Ying and the others should also be back. When Wan Ying returns, we'll be busy." Chapter 194. Ian slept very late that night at the Xiao family's residence. This was not the Liang province guard, and there was a middle door between the rooms. Ian was even more nervous now that he knew Xiao Ju was next door. She didn't know if it was just her imagination, but she felt that Xiao Ju was treating her much more gently now. To Xiao Ju, it might be a small matter, but to her, it could easily stir up the deepest and most secret emotions in her heart. Ian turned over, but her current status was special. Once she returned to Shuajing, everything related to Su Zhiheng and He Rufei was right in front of her. No matter who she was with, she would be a burden. Xiao Ju already had a deep grudge against the Xiao family. If she implicated him, Ian took a deep breath and looked at the curtain above her head. This was not a good idea. Her mind was filled with all kinds of complicated thoughts. She only fell asleep in the middle of the night. When she woke up the next day, it was already late in the morning. She was stunned for a moment, then turned over and sat up. She changed her clothes and opened the door. Sitting on the steps facing the courtyard was a little servant girl around 8 or 9 years old. She was chubby and was holding her face as she carefully looked at the ants in the corner. When she heard movement, she raised her head, revealing a round face like that of a doll in a New Year painting. She smiled so widely that her eyes narrowed into slits. Gongzi is awake. She patted the dust off her clothes, stood up, and jogged over to Hien. This child was still too young. With her short legs, Hien was afraid that she would fall. Hien asked, "You are?" "This servant is called Baigua." The little servant girl replied obediently. "Second young master told this servant to take care of you. However, if Gongzi didn't call for me, I couldn't enter Gongzi's room. Since Gongzi is awake, this servant will go to the kitchen and bring breakfast over." Her voice was so soft that Hien couldn't help but pat her head and ask, "Where's your family's second young master?" "Second young master left early in the morning," Baigua answered with a smile. Before second young master left, he said that young master didn't need to be restrained. If you didn't want to stay in a foo, you could leave the foo to do things and come back early at night. She thought of something and added, "There are banknotes in the wooden drawer on the table in young master's room. Second young master said that young master can take it and use it. If there's anything else that young master needs, young master can directly tell this servant. This servant will report to young mistress." This little girl still had an irrepressible childishness, but her words were clear and logical. Hien couldn't help laughing. "You're so young. How could your family's second young master let you serve me? Nubi's father is the steward of the foo." Baigua puffed out her chest proudly. "Second young master sent Nubi over. Nubi will definitely take good care of young master." "Thank you very much," Hien said with a smile. Baigua was very excited. It seemed that this was the first time she had received such an important task. She replied, "Young master is a second young master's friend. There's no need to thank Nubi. Nubi will go to the kitchen now. Young master, please wait a moment. The hot water is in the silver kettle at the door of the courtyard. If young master wants to wash your face, you can pour it directly." Second young master said that young master doesn't like to be touched by people. Nubi doesn't need to do such a small thing as pouring water. She stuck out her tongue and ran away. Hien looked at her back and thought. Xiao Ju was very thoughtful. She found such a simple and pure little girl. Even if she saw that there was something wrong with her, she wouldn't think of anything else. What if it was a smart person who came over and accidentally discovered her identity? What would she do then? She lowered her head and laughed. First, she went to the place by Guo mentioned to fetch water and returned to the room to freshen up. Just as she finished, Bai Guo came in with a food basket. She stepped over the threshold and put the food basket on the table. "Young master, after you finish eating, just leave the food basket here. Nubi will clean it up. Nubi will come in again if you need anything." Before Yin could say anything, she immediately left. Yin was speechless. He really didn't know what Xiao Ju said to her. The food was plain porridge and side dishes, just like last night. It wasn't extravagant, but it was exquisite and meticulous. Yin finished the food and put the empty plates into the food basket. He tidied his clothes and walked to the table. He thought of what Bai Guo said and opened the wooden drawer. Sure enough, there was a thick stack of banknotes inside. He thought that Bai Guo would at most have 1 or 2 banknotes. He didn't expect Xiao Ju to be so generous. This amount of banknotes was enough to give the girl a betrothal gift. Evil aristocratic children, Yin thought angrily. No wonder when Xiao Ju went to buy clothes in Jiang, he bought 100 tails of mermaid gauze without batting an eye. With money, one could really do whatever they wanted. Yin didn't touch the banknotes inside. Instead, he closed the wooden drawer and walked out of the room. She had a good memory and knew how to walk from this courtyard to the entrance of Xiao Mansion. She didn't meet by Rongwei or Xiao Jing along the way. As for the rest of the servants, she didn't know if Xiao Ju greeted them in advance, but none of them paid attention to her. They only focused on their own tasks. It was as if Yan's appearance in the Xiao family was a very natural thing. It was as if she had lived in the Xiao family since a long time ago and was a member of the Xiao family. Yin walked out of Shao Mansion's main door without much effort. As soon as he walked out, he saw the bright sunlight. Yin narrowed his eyes and walked in a certain direction. Before she left the capital to join the army, she had already won a large sum of money at Lutong Village. Yin Sheng went to school. Now a year and a half had passed. She didn't know if Yin Sheng was still studying at that school. It wasn't good for her to go directly to the He family. After all, the neighbors had watched Lady He grow up. Even if she dressed as a man, she might be recognized. He Yunxing's classmates at school had never seen He Yin before. It was probably safer. At this moment, the time was just right. He Yin didn't spend much effort and arrived at the entrance of Helu Academy. Helu Academy couldn't be compared to Xian Chongguan, but it was still considered a good school for ordinary people. In a way, where scholars were more important than martial arts, Yuelu Academy not only taught literature, but also had teachers to teach martial arts. This was something that He Yin valued the most. He Yinsheng was a bit late in learning. He wasn't interested in learning, but his martial arts were quite good. If he wanted to walk the path of a martial artist in the future, it wasn't impossible. It was early in the morning, the best time to study. Sounds of people reading came from Yuelu Academy. He Yin wasn't a member of the academy, so it wasn't good for him to go in directly. He ordered a cup of tea from a tea house outside and sat for about an hour. When it was time for school to end, he took advantage of the time when the teachers were leaving to climb over the wall and enter the academy. From time to time, students would leave the academy. He Yin wanted to find a teenager and ask He Yinsheng where he was. Unknowingly, he had already walked to the window of the school. The laughter of the teenagers came from inside. There was a bit of malicious ridicule. "Brother Yinsheng, are you really not coming with us today? Today is Brother Wang's birthday." Another person said, "How could Brother Yinsheng look down on us? Look at us playing together. When have we ever seen Brother Yinsheng come with us? Brother Yinsheng is so good in martial arts. His face is charming. Girls like him. Maybe he can get married in the future and have a meteoric rise. Why would he hang out with us?" There was another wave of laughter. He Yin frowned slightly. This kind of ridicule was too hurtful. He Yinsheng was a proud and impatient person. How could he stand this? They wouldn't fight, right? She was worried. She sneaked a peek inside and saw a teenager in green standing in front of the table. He was tidying up the table with his head lowered. From beginning to end, he didn't say a word. He actually endured this kind of humiliation. He probably felt like he was punching cotton. There was no sound at all. The teenagers messed around for a while and felt bored. They left the school in 2s and 3s. At the same time, He Yinsheng tidied up the table and got up to leave. He Yin followed He Yinsheng from a distance. He Yinsheng entered an empty alley. He had only taken a few steps when he suddenly felt a strong wind behind him. He subconsciously turned around and struck back with his palm. That palm didn't hit anyone. Instead, it hit another soft but tough palm. It silently blocked the wind from his palm and easily made him retreat a few steps. "Who is it?" he shouted vigilantly. The next moment, a familiar voice with a smile sounded. "Good boy. It seems that the year of school training wasn't in vain. You've grown a lot stronger." Hearing this voice, He Yinsheng was stunned. He couldn't believe his ears. The palm in front of him moved away, revealing the person's face. A face that was similar to his would appear in his mind every now and then. It was a beautiful and elegant face that was familiar yet unfamiliar at the same time. His older sister. "He Yin, you?" He Yunxing's voice trembled. He Yin slapped his head and rubbed it. "What about you? Call me older sister. Why are you back?" He Yinsheng seemed to have finally regained his senses. He rubbed his eyes. It was at this moment that He Yin saw a little of the boy he used to see. He stepped forward and grabbed He Yin's elbows as if to confirm whether he was dreaming or reality. "You're really back? He Yin, when did you come back? Do you know that Dad and I have been worried to death this year?" His eyes were red and his voice was choked with sobs. He Yin looked at the boy in front of her and couldn't help but sigh. The boy grew quickly. He Yinsheng was much taller than before after a year and a half. Now, she had to look up at him. He was also much thinner than before. He looked tall and straight, as if he was already an adult. He Yin pulled him out. "This is not the place to talk. Come with me." In the tea room, exquisite pastries were placed in front of him. He Yinsheng had no intention of eating them. The person in front of him pushed the plate in front of him. Don't you like to eat these? Eat more. He Yinsheng straightened his neck and said, I don't like sweets. He rolled her eyes in her heart. She wondered who was the one who drooled over the pastries he Sui gave her when they were chopping firewood in the mountains. She looked at the boy in front of her. The child had grown up and knew how to protect his own self-esteem. It was strange. She had met Cheng Lisu and Song Tao Tao, who were all younger than her. However, she always had an inexplicable concern for He Yunsheng. This concern was well hidden when she was in Liangzhou. Once she saw He Yunsheng, she couldn't suppress it. She just wanted to give the best to this child and hope that he would be well in the future. Perhaps it was because this body was Lady He's. This was the wonder of blood ties. You still haven't told me why you came back. He Yunsheng stared at He Yin and hesitated. Also, why do you look like this now? He Yin looked at him with a smile. Isn't this good? He Yunsheng didn't say it was bad or good. He just felt that it was strange. He was used to seeing He Yin in dresses. He had also seen her in men's clothes once. However, even then, she didn't look as natural as she did now. If He Yin wasn't his sister, He Yunsheng would never believe that this person was a woman if he saw her on the street. He Yin was quite beautiful. Even when He Yunsheng and He Yunsheng had a bad relationship in the past, he couldn't admit this fact. However, her beauty always seemed a little frivolous and cheap, especially when she tried every possible way to get He Sui's money to buy clothes and accessories for herself. He Yin was a little darker than before. She didn't wear any makeup. Instead of saying that she was beautiful, it was better to say that she was heroic. That bright light made her eyes as bright as the stars. Actually, she was also beautiful. In fact, she was even more attractive than before. However, this wasn't the main point. He Yunsheng came back to his senses and said, Are you still in the barracks? No, if you were still in the barracks, how could you run out? Your sister is very capable. My superior appreciates me. He Yin picked up her tea and took a sip. When I joined the army, I was lucky enough to be appointed a small official. Now, I can't be compared to the top, but I can be compared to the bottom. How could you be appointed an official? He Yunsheng was shocked. Don't you know that you are a woman? Even if you can hide it for a while, you can't hide it forever. If your identity is discovered in the future, you will be finished. No, He Yunsheng was anxious. Hurry up and resign. Resign tomorrow. He Yin tilted her head and looked at him. Aren't you going to ask me what official position I was appointed to? No matter what official position it is, you can't stay. He Yunsheng said impatiently. Even if you were the prime minister, you can't stay. Besides, the higher your position, the more dangerous it is. Even if it's for glory and wealth, you can't put your life on the line. You must resign. He Yin was startled. For a moment, she was in a daze. He Yunsheng, a child, could understand the logic. How could the two old masters of the He family, who were officials in the imperial court, not understand? This was clearly an extremely dangerous thing to do. Once it was discovered, she would die. But the He family still let her do it, and they did it for so many years. So it was just that human nature was greedy, and they couldn't bear to part with that bit of glory and wealth. Or perhaps, in their eyes, He Yan's life was just a bargaining chip that wasn't worth a single cent compared to the glory of their future. Hey, are you listening to me? He Yunsheng waved his hand in front of her. He Yin raised his head and smiled. Of course I know what you're talking about. I must resign, but now is not the time. I still have some things to do. When I finish, I will resign. He Yunsheng was about to ask her what she wanted to do, but He Yin suddenly opened her mouth again. She asked, Let's not talk about me. What about you guys? When I wasn't in Shuajing, how was father? Did the Fan family come looking for trouble? He Yunsheng's expression darkened. Those bastards. How could they not come looking for trouble? It turned out that after He Yin joined the army, Fan Cheng's murderer was never found. The Fan family vented their anger on the He family. Although He Yin was also a victim, because He Yin's body was never found, there was no evidence. Fan Cheng's family often found trouble with He Sui in the field. They slandered He Sui for not doing things properly, causing He Sui to lose his position as a field officer. Fortunately, not long after that, There was a merchant in Shuajing who wanted to hire a bodyguard. When they found out that He Sui was a field officer and had good skills, they asked He Sui to work for them. Although it didn't sound as good as being a field officer, the merchant was generous and gave him a lot of money. Yin was a little suspicious. You have a lot of money, but aren't you wearing old clothes? From the words of your classmates, it's clear that they dislike you for not being willing to spend money with them. Yinsheng looked at her in disbelief. You actually eavesdropped? Yin smiled. I was just passing by and happened to hear it. You kept the money and didn't use it. Could it be that you saved it as a betrothal gift? Yinsheng didn't say anything. He couldn't tell Yin that although his family had a lot of money, he had discussed it with He Sui. They didn't know when Yin would come back after joining the army. As a girl, he didn't know how much hardship she had suffered outside. It was good enough that she was still alive. If she was old when she came back, or if she was disliked by others, she would not marry and save more money. In the future, if Yin wanted to live alone in Shuajing, having more money would not be a bad thing. Seeing that Yinsheng didn't say anything, Yin thought that he had guessed correctly. She smiled and said, "Don't be so thrifty. I'm a person with a salary now." She took out 2 banknotes from her bosom and said in a low voice, "We won the battle earlier. These are the spoils of war, His Majesty's reward. Take this money, go back and make 2 new clothes for father and yourself. Treat yourself better. Clothes make a man, and a horse makes a saddle. If you dress up well, the girl you like will like you, right? Young girls like handsome men. Although you have a handsome face, you don't have a good personality. You need to dress up." Yinsheng held the banknotes in his hand. After a while, he asked, "You won the battle? Did you go to the battlefield? Which battle?" "The battle at Jiang, the battle at Liangzhou, or the battle at the Rendezvous." Yin didn't expect him to care about these things. She scratched her head and said, "Actually, I went to all these battles." Yinsheng sucked in a breath of cold air. Yin left in a hurry and only left a letter behind. Yinsheng later asked around and found out that the batch of soldiers recruited by Shuo capital all went to the Liangzhou Guard. After that, he always paid attention to news about the Liangzhou Guard. He heard that the journey was long and many weak people died on the way. He prayed every day, hoping that his mother in heaven would protect Yin and keep him safe. He also heard that the Liangzhou Guard suffered from the cold and worked hard to train the soldiers. He only hoped that Yin could be the head soldier. When Raidamuzi led the soldiers to the Liangzhou Guard, he and He Sui couldn't sleep for the whole night. Later, they comforted each other that Yin would be fine. She couldn't even carry a saber and was smart. She might not even see the enemy. The battle at Jiang, the battle at Rendezvous. In short, He Sui and Yinsheng had a hard time ever since Yin joined the army. If they weren't afraid that the Fan family would find Yan's whereabouts, they would have packed their bags and rushed to Liangzhou personally. "Didn't I ask someone to send you a message?" Yin asked. Yinsheng frowned and thought for a while, then said, "There were 2 messages, but they were very short. Also, they were written on a note and threw it into the house. I didn't get to meet them, so I don't know about your situation." Yinsheng was angry and anxious when he said this. "What were you thinking at that time? Why did you want to join the army? You're a girl. No one said that girls can't join the army." Yin was afraid of his nagging, so she cut him off. "Besides, don't you see that I'm safe and sound now? By the way, father is no longer a lieutenant. Is the Fan family still harassing you?" Yinsheng shook his head. "A few months ago, the Fan family stopped coming." He said sarcastically, "We can accept their beating and scolding. They probably know that it's meaningless to continue like this. I heard that the Fan family's old master has another son, so they probably don't care about the previous one." Yin couldn't help but be speechless. The Fan family's old master could still have a son at such an old age. He really didn't know what to say. "Come back with me." Yinsheng looked at Yin. "Father will be home tonight. When you come back, he'll be very happy to see you." Yin shook his head. "I can go back now." "Why?" "Yinsheng." Yin looked at him patiently. "My identity is very delicate now. Everyone in the neighborhood has seen my face. If I'm recognized, there will be trouble. Even if I want to meet father, it won't be at home. Moreover, now is not a good time." She stuffed the banknotes into Yinsheng's hands. "I came here today to see you. I'm relieved to see that you're doing well. Go back and tell father that I'm fine. We'll find a place to meet again in a few days. He Yunsheng felt a little wronged. It wasn't easy to see him, but he had to hide as if he couldn't be seen. However, he knew in his heart that He Yan was right. Then what about you? He stuffed the banknotes back into He Yan's hands. Don't you need to use the banknotes yourself? You can take them yourself. Also, where are you staying now? An inn? Inns are not safe. I heard that there are many unscrupulous shops. He Yan couldn't be bothered to push the banknotes back and forth. She stuffed the banknotes into his arms and said, I still have a lot of them. It's a thick stack. You can use them whenever you want. You don't have to worry about it. I'm not staying in an inn now. I've asked someone to look for a house to rent. Before that, I'll be staying at a friend's house. Friend? He Yunsheng's ears perked up. He looked at her vigilantly and impatiently asked, What friend? Did you meet him at the Liang Province Guards? How old is he? Is he a man or a woman? He Yan was speechless. Why did he look like a father who wanted his daughter to stay the night outside? She thought that if she said Xiao Ju's name, He Yunsheng would probably follow her back to the Xiao residence tonight. After all, He Yunsheng's words were still fresh in He Yan's mind. If I were a woman, I would only love him. He Yan's mouth twitched. For a moment, she couldn't imagine He Yunsheng and Xiao Ju standing together. After a while, she said, Why do you care so much? Anyway, he's a big shot. Chapter 195. With great difficulty, she managed to brush him off. In the end, He Yan stuffed 2 banknotes into He Yunsheng's hands. She then carefully warned him that other than He Sui, He Yunsheng was not to say anything about seeing her. He Yunsheng said impatiently, Of course I know, but you. He looked at He Yan. You won't disappear again, right? That day when they were on the boat, Fan Sheng had met with an accident. He Yan disguised herself as an assassin and left. She had also said to He Yunsheng, We will definitely meet again. But not long after, she joined the army. He Yan sighed in his heart. This child, she was about to leave a shadow in his heart. She stood on her tiptoes and patted He Yunsheng's head. He Yunsheng moved his head away and smiled. Don't worry. I am now an official in the capital. Don't worry. I will come to see you in a few days. You should focus on your studies. As a younger brother, you can't be less successful than me, your older sister. He Yunsheng's face sank and said, How is that possible? He thought that He Yan was going to mock him, but instead he saw the girl dressed as a teenager looking at him with a smile. Her voice was gentle. I know, our Yunsheng is the most powerful. He Yunsheng's face turned red and he muttered in a low voice. Do I need you to tell me that? After sending He Yunsheng to the alley, He Yan lowered the curtain hat on her head, turned around, and walked out. There was no harm in being vigilant in everything. They parted ways. He Yan walked down the street, thinking about what happened when she saw He Yunsheng. After that, Fan Sheng was still looking for trouble with He Sui. Although he had stopped for a few days, who knew if he would do the same thing again in the future? Although her official position could put pressure on the Fan family, later he would come to the Fan family's door every few days to cry. Everyone in the Fan family recognized her face. She was afraid that it would be inappropriate to rashly expose her identity. He had to think about it from a long-term perspective. But what was gratifying was that He Yunsheng had really grown up. He Yan smiled when he thought of this. This young man now had the bearing of a man. When faced with the crowd's taunts and mockery, he didn't immediately hit back like before. He knew how to be patient. It was a heart-wrenching and gratifying growth. While he was thinking, he had unknowingly walked to the door of the Xiao family. It was already afternoon. When a manservant at the door saw He Yan, he greeted him with a smile, Young master he, and then stepped aside to open the door. He Yan's heart warmed slightly. The people of the Xiao family were very friendly to him. He Yan walked towards a courtyard. She didn't know if Xiao Ju was back yet. If he was, she wanted to talk to him about what happened next. Unexpectedly, as soon as he reached the corridor, he ran into Bai Rongwei, who was giving orders to the servants. He Yan had a good impression of Mrs. Xiao. She was gentle and considerate, and she was good at taking care of others' feelings. Seeing He Yan, Bai Rongwei was stunned for a moment. Then she smiled and said, Young master He Yan nodded at her. Madam, Huijin hasn't returned to the Fu yet. By Wei asked Yin, young master have you eaten? If you haven't, what do you want to eat? I'll ask the kitchen to make some food and send it to your room. There's no need to trouble yourself, Yin quickly replied. I've already eaten outside. Sheng had eaten some snacks in the tea house. Although it wasn't as exquisite as the food in the restaurant, it wasn't bad. Sheng rarely ate outside. At first, he was a bit hesitant, but later on, he ate happily. Bai Wei smiled and said, if that's the case, then let's wait until later. She looked at Yin. Young master, he is the first friend that Huaijin brought back. It seems that you took good care of Huaijin when you were in the Hangzhou. No, it was the governor who took care of me. Yin blushed. Huaijin rarely opens his heart to others. He must have treated you like this because, young master, he deserves a sincere friendship. Bai Wei sighed. He usually doesn't like to express himself. If he does something wrong, I'll have to trouble young master, he to forgive him. This child has a good heart, but he always acts like he's unreasonable. The governor is a very good person. Yin smiled. Everyone knows that. Bai Wei saw that she wasn't being perfunctory and sighed in relief. That's good. He's always been alone. There's no girl by his side who cares about him. At this point, Bai Wei seemed to have thought of something. She asked Yin, oh right, young master you're close to Huaijin. Do you know why he's angry with Miss Shen? Miss Shun? Yin asked. Shen Muxue? Bai Wei nodded. What happened between the two of them? When you returned to the capital this time, Miss Shun didn't come with you. I heard that it was because Huaijin was rushing to the rendezvous. He didn't want Miss Shun to be tired from the long journey. However, Miss Shun already returned to the capital a few days ago, but the two of them didn't meet. If it was any other time, Miss Shun would have come to the Fu. Seeing that Yin was lost in thought, Bai Wei explained, young master, he probably already knows about the relationship between the Shun family and our Fu. When father was in trouble, only Uncle Shun was willing to speak up for the Xiao family. Miss Shun liked Huaijin when she was young. A friend in need is a friend indeed. Even though Huaijin treated Miss Shun coldly in the past, he still took care of her because of Uncle Shun. Later, Miss Shun secretly went behind Uncle Shun's back to where Huaijin was leading the troops. At that time, the war was chaotic and it wasn't safe to send her back. Thus, Miss Shun stayed on the battlefield and learned medicine. She has been helping Huaijin since then. Uncle Shun couldn't do anything about his daughter. He could only ask Huaijin to help take care of her. Huaijin accepted Uncle Shun's kindness and protected Miss Shun's safety on the battlefield. He already knew that Shun Muxue went to the battlefield for Xiaoju, but he didn't know the details. Now that he heard Bai Wei's explanation, he couldn't help but feel bitter. Shen Muxue's actions were very brave and affectionate, just like what Liang Ping and the others said that day at the martial arts practice field. As long as one was a man, they would be moved and feel pity for her. She heard her own voice ask softly, hiding all her emotions, does Foreign want the two of them to be together? How could that be? Bai Wei was slightly stunned, then laughed. Ruby and I had this idea before, but then we saw that Huaijin really didn't have any feelings for Miss Shun, so we gave up. Young master, you're close to Huaijin. You should know that with Huaijin's personality, no one can force him to do anything, let alone marry. Since he didn't have any feelings for her, we naturally couldn't force him. Otherwise, not only would we hurt Huaijin, but we would also hurt Miss Shun. Yin heard this and was somewhat suspicious. He only asked Bai Wei, I don't quite understand what foreign means. Even if they can't be husband and wife, they're still friends. Miss Shun didn't want to visit, so it's obvious that they had a conflict over something. But Huaijin isn't a petty person, and Miss Shun isn't an unreasonable girl. After thinking about it, there's only one possibility. She looked at Yin, her eyes sparkling. There was a trace of expectation in her usually gentle expression. Yin looked at her, puzzled. Does Huaijin have a girl he likes? Yin, huh? Bai Wei continued. If Huaijin has a girl he likes, then everything makes sense. Only this would truly hurt Miss Shun's heart, and she wouldn't even be willing to visit. Young master have you seen anyone in Huaijin's heart? Yin, I don't think so. How can that be? Bai Wei was slightly disappointed, but she quickly continued to ask, Then is there any girl in the Liangzhou Guard who's close to Huaijin? Other than Miss Shun, there aren't any other girls in the Liangzhou Guard. He abruptly stopped speaking. Actually, there was a girl in the Liangzhou Guard who was close to Xiao Ju. Wasn't that her? But Xiao Ju liked him, and she even had a conflict with Shin Muxue because of him. It sounded unimaginable. Bai Rongwei sighed. If that's the case, then it's really worrying. Seeing He and looking at her, Bai Rongwei smiled bitterly. Huaijin should have gotten married a long time ago at his age. But he doesn't even have a girl he likes, let alone a wife. Ruby and I are both worried. Even if his classmates in the Xianchang Pavilion aren't married, they're all engaged. Although young Master Lin isn't engaged either, he has dealings with girls, so it shouldn't be difficult for him to get married. Huaijin, He couldn't help but speak up for Xiao Ju. If the commander-in-chief wants to get married, it shouldn't be difficult. Bai Rongwei glanced at him and smiled. It really isn't difficult. Everyone else wants to marry a girl, and a matchmaker comes knocking on their door. Our family wants to get married, and the matchmaker fills the courtyard with gifts. But what's the use? No matter how many girls like him, no matter how good they are, he won't look at them. If it weren't for the banquets we hold every time we return to the capital, I'm afraid he would have left in a huff. She didn't know what to say, so she could only squeeze out a smile. Speaking of which, it's almost time to hold the banquet. Bai Rongwei looked at Yin and smiled. Young Master, he should come too. I heard that young Master is a few years younger than Huaijin. You're young and promising, and you're born with an extraordinary appearance. If there's a girl you like at the banquet, then you'll have a good marriage. She was thinking wholeheartedly for Yin. Yin was about to cry when he heard this. He thought, how come it's one thing to be hurt in the Liangzhou Guards, but it's still unavoidable when we return to the capital? What is her heart that has been tempered thousands of times not afraid of being burned? Yin forced a smile and said, we'll talk about it when the time comes. I'm also a bit busy these days. Bai Rongwei nodded. Young Master, he should be busy with his own matters. You don't have to take it to heart. I'm just saying it casually. Yin was afraid that if he continued to talk with Bai Rongwei, she would say something heart-wrenching. He hurriedly found an excuse to return to the courtyard. He hurriedly bowed to her and returned to his own room. When he returned to his room, he closed the door. Yin sat in front of the table and looked at the flowers and grass in the courtyard outside the window. He punched the table and pretended to be angry. Outrageous! If someone came to let her see Xiao Ju and other girls, she would simply tell the world that she was a homosexual and had improper thoughts about Xiao Ju. Let's see if they would still let her do such a good thing. At the same time, in a restaurant somewhere in the capital, someone was sitting in a private room. Fei Nu and Qi Wu stood at the door. Not long after, someone came in from outside. It was a woman wearing a guard's uniform. She was around 30 years old and was very beautiful. However, her long hair was tied up in a high bun. Her eyes were cold and sharp, making her seem somewhat unapproachable. She strode into the private room without looking at Qi Wu and Fei Nu. She only bowed to Xiao Ju and said, Young Master, wanting. Xiao Ju looked at her. Is there any news about He Rufei? The woman called Luan Ying respectfully said, regarding He Rufei's previous deeds, this subordinate has already written a letter to Qi Wu to bring it to young Master. In the past few days, there have been new discoveries. Ever since He Rufei was conferred the title of general, apart from this battle in Huayuan, he has never left the capital. Moreover, the officials that he has good relations with in the court are mostly civil officials. Civil officials. Xiao Ju bent his finger and tapped the teacup in front of him. He lightly said, Does he have any girls that he is familiar with? Wanning was startled. She immediately replied, Not yet. He Rufei has now reached the age of marriage. I heard that first, madam, he is currently looking for a suitable wife for him. However, He Rufei himself doesn't seem to be close to women. Other than his second cousin, he rarely interacts with women. Second cousin? He Yuanliang's second legitimate daughter. He Xining is now the new wife of Hanlin scholar Su Jiang. Wanning replied. Xiao Ju lowered his eyes and looked at the teacup in front of him. After a while, he asked, What is the relationship between He Rufei and the previous first Madame Su? The previous First Madame Su? Luaning was confused for a moment. After a while, she said, "It seems not bad." The previous First Madame Su's health wasn't good. Before she got married, she had been recuperating in the manor. Although there is no evidence that they were close, after First Madame Su's death, He Rufei personally took care of her funeral. The funeral lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. It can be seen how close they were. Xiao Ju's mouth twitched. That might not be the case. It really was a close sibling relationship. He Rufei should have stopped He Xining from marrying Su Zhiheng as a second wife. To his younger sister who had died young, this matter definitely couldn't be considered a consolation, but an insult. However, He Rufei wouldn't be surprised no matter what he did now. This was because the current General Fei Hong wasn't He Rufei at all. The real He Rufei might have died before becoming a general, or he might not have died yet. However, the He family definitely wouldn't allow a woman to occupy the glory, splendor, and wealth that was prepared for He Rufei. Therefore, the current He Rufei had appeared. However, what he didn't understand was that in this matter, He Rufei had become a vested interest, and the He family had become a community of interests. However, what about that woman, He Rufei? What made her willingly wear a mask and use He Rufei's name to fight for meritorious service? Did she have a crush on He Rufei? That was also possible. However, even if she did have a crush on him, she had persisted for too long. The real He Rufei was foolish and stubborn. However, the current He Rufei was a smart person who was willing to let all of his trusted subordinates die in battle in order to not let the news leak out. It could be imagined that the original He Rufei had most likely met with misfortune after the rabbit was killed and the dog was cooked. "Go spread the news," Xiao Ju said. During the Battle of Huayuan, He Rufei's ability to control the enemy retreated 1,000 miles in a single night. He's like a completely different person from before. After this, you must closely monitor He Rufei. Who he meets, what he does, don't miss a single thing. Wanting. Yes. Xiao Ju picked up his teacup and took a sip. Then he looked at her. "What about the other matter? How is your investigation going?" Wan Ying's expression turned cold. This subordinate was just about to report this matter to young master. In the village outside the city, there seemed to be soldiers who were lucky enough to survive the Battle of Mingshui. However, they hid very well. Prime Minister Su's people are also looking for their whereabouts. Previously, we found one, but he refused to believe us. He didn't wait to see us and jumped into a well to commit suicide. Xiao Ju's hand paused. He put down the teacup and lowered his eyes. "You continue to search for the remaining people. Be careful not to be discovered by Su Jingfu's people. After you find them, immediately inform me." He tilted his head, his expression very calm. "I'll go see them myself." Late at night, the sound of the door opening came from next door. Yen, who was sitting at the table, felt his heart skip a beat. He stood up and opened the door. Sure enough, he saw Xiao Ju in front of the door next door. She called out, "Commander-in-Chief." Then she ran over. Xiao Ju looked down at her and asked, "Why aren't you sleeping yet?" Yen blurted out, "I'm waiting for you." Xiao Ju raised his eyebrows slightly. "I'm not Yen." After saying this, he walked in unhurriedly. Yen followed behind like a tail. After 2 steps, he came back to his senses. What did he mean by that? In a split second, his face became hot. Chi Wu and Fei Nu didn't follow in. Yen helped him close the door. Xiao Ju wasn't used to being served by others. There were no servants or maids in the room. At this moment, he leaned against the wall. He poured 2 cups of tea and handed one to Yen. "Thank you." Yen took the tea. He didn't want to drink it. He held the tea and asked, "Commander-in-Chief, I came to ask you something. When will you bring me to the palace?" Xiao Ju unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of his brocade robe and said casually, "What do you want to do in the palace?" "Our Rundu won the battle. Jiang won the battle. Previously, we also won the battle in the Liangzhou Guards. His Majesty will definitely reward us in person. Moreover, it's almost a mid-autumn festival. There will only be more rewards. In any case, I've been with you for so long. When does His Majesty plan to reward me at the banquet? I want to buy some clothes in advance and dress up." Yen spoke with conviction. Xiao Ju stared at her for a while and smiled. Build a career? If Ian hadn't said it, she would have almost forgotten that she had said it before. However, Ian didn't feel anything when he used it to tease her. She nodded shamelessly. Yes, it's already halfway done. Commander-in-Chief, please help me add a little more. If I'm made a high-ranking official, I'll be an official in the same court as you. We can help each other. Xiao Ju laughed. Nonsense. Ian was a little anxious. She was anxious to enter the palace because this was the only way she could meet up with Su Zhiheng and He Rufei first. In the past, after a victorious general returned to the capital, there would be a banquet in the palace. Hundreds of officials would sit together, and it would be a good opportunity for her to appear. Now, she could directly go to the Su family and He family's doorstep and wait for them. However, the effect would not be as good as the other method. Moreover, once she entered the palace, it would be the best opportunity for her to draw a clear line between her and Xiao Ju. Thinking of this, Hien couldn't help but feel a little sad. When she thought about what Bai Ronwei said during the day, she felt even more depressed. Xiao Ju had always been sharp. Hien's suddenly depressed expression fell into his eyes. Xiao Ju paused and asked, "What's wrong?" Hien looked up and changed the topic. "Commander-in-Chief, did you and Miss Shen have a fight?" Xiao Ju was stunned and looked away. "Why do you ask?" "I met young Mistress Xiao in the residence today. She asked me if I knew why you and Miss Shen had a fight." Hien's voice was bitter. "When I left Liangzhou to go to the Rendezvous, both of you were fine. Later on, when I met you in the Rendezvous, Miss Shen didn't come with you. Brother Lin said that it was because he didn't want Miss Shen to be tired from the long journey. Now it seems that you two didn't travel together because you had a fight." "It wasn't a fight." Xiao Ju interrupted her. "It wasn't necessary." Hien, "What do you mean it wasn't necessary?" Xiao Ju lowered his head and stared into her eyes. She couldn't understand the emotions in his eyes. His voice was still calm, as if nothing had happened. "She isn't anyone to me. Why should I bring her along?" Hien blinked. This atmosphere, this attitude, this tone, it was really easy for people to misunderstand. How could an ordinary girl withstand all this? Even someone like her, who had lived 2 lifetimes, was stirred up. She took a few deep breaths to calm herself down. "You can't say that. Miss Shen has always been by your side. You two can be considered friends. If there really is a misunderstanding, it's better to talk it out. You came to my room just to say this?" Xiao Ju asked calmly. "Ah, that's not it." Hien looked at her. "I just wanted to say that if His Majesty wants to hold a banquet before the Mid-Autumn Festival, you must bring me along." Her eyes were full of undisguised eagerness. "I have never met His Majesty. If I can meet him, I can show off to my brother the next time I see him." Xiao Ju raised his eyebrows. "You went to see He Yinsheng today?" "Yes." Hien did not hide anything. "I've been away from home for a long time. My family is worried sick. Now that I'm back in Shuajing, I should let them know that I'm safe." Xiao Ju looked at her meaningfully. "You told them that you're staying in my residence?" Hien was shocked and immediately denied it. No, I will never do such a thing that tarnishes the governor's reputation. I only said that I'm staying at a friend's house. I didn't say who it was. I don't think they would guess that I'm staying at your residence." Xiao Ju did not know what she meant. She nodded. "Actually, there's no harm in telling them." He looked at the stunned Hien and said calmly, "You're my right-hand woman. They will find out about our relationship sooner or later." Hien, what was wrong with Xiao Ju? Their relationship was supposed to be between a superior and a subordinate, but he made it sound like a shameful relationship between a man and a woman. It made her blush and her heart race. She felt embarrassed. Hien cleared her throat. "Anyway, just remember to bring me along to the banquet. If you bring me along, I will repay you in the future." Xiao Ju sized her up and said lazily, "How will you repay me?" "Hien, I haven't thought about it yet." He sneered and turned to put down the teapot on the table. He said casually, "Okay, Lady He can come with me for the next banquet." Hien was overjoyed and his eyes curved. "Thank you." Chapter 196. After receiving Xiao Ju's verbal promise that she would bring He Yin to the palace banquet, He Yin slept exceptionally soundly that night. When she woke up the next morning, as usual, Xiao Ju was not there. There was only Bai Guo sitting in the courtyard, waiting for her to wake up and have breakfast, just like yesterday. Tian was used to waking up early in her previous life. Now that she had slept until late in the morning, she felt embarrassed to let a little girl wait for her. She asked Bai Guo, "Bai Guo, did your second young master say where he went?" Bai Guo shook her head. "Is young master he looking for second young master for something urgent?" Tian smiled. "I'm just asking casually." However, she felt a little strange. After returning to the capital, Xiao Ju seemed to be very busy. What exactly was she busy with? However, she did not think too much about it. She had other things to do today. Tian greeted Bai Guo, changed her clothes, and went out. She did not call for a carriage. Instead, she wore a curtain hat and walked on the streets by herself. She could walk past the Su residence with her eyes closed. Not long after, she stopped in front of the vermilion door. Tian stood at the door and looked at the residence in front of her. Looking in from the outside, the residence looked even narrower. It was so narrow that it seemed like it could not contain one's ambition. It was so narrow that it was like a coffin burying her in it. Tian thought that after so much time had passed, she had already calmed down. However, when she really stood here, she found it difficult to calm down. It was here that Wanru had pushed her into a pool of cold water, and she had never seen the sun again. The servant at the door was sweeping the floor. Su Zhiheng was a very particular person. The residence had to be clean at all times. He did not like blemishes, just like how he did not like scars on a woman's skin. Tian walked forward and said, "Little brother, I want to ask you about someone." The manservant who was sweeping stopped and looked at Hien, asking, I was asked by someone to inquire about someone," Hien said in a low voice. "Is there a concubine mother called Wanru in your family?" As soon as these words came out, the manservant's face changed. The next moment, he felt a heavy object in his hand. Looking down, he saw that it was an ingot of silver. The manservant swallowed his saliva and subconsciously put the silver into his sleeve. He looked around to make sure no one was paying attention and said in a low voice, "Young master, please wait for me under the locust tree in the alley ahead. This is not the place to talk." Hien nodded. "I understand. You will definitely come. If you can help me find out about this person." She smiled. "I won't forget to reward you." The young servant was overjoyed. Of course, of course." Hien did not say much to him. Just as the manservant was worried, this was not the place to talk. Moreover, with the relationship between Su Zhiheng and He Rufei, it was inevitable that He Rufei's men would be walking around outside. She lowered her veil hat and waited under the locust tree in the alley where they had agreed to meet. Hien was not afraid that the manservant would take the silver and not admit it. Although the Su family was also an official family, they were not generous to their servants. It was probably because Su Zhiheng was originally a Hanlon scholar and learned to be a scholar. He was more willing to spend money on decorations, such as the tiles of the residence. Madame Su's favorite saying was, "If you treated your servants too well, it would not be good if they became disloyal." You have to know that one should be grateful for one's worth and hate for another. Servants and masters should not get too close. Because she had stayed in the military camp for many years, she did not have much of an opinion about the relationship between servants and masters. She always felt that people were people. High or low status was just an accessory brought about by reincarnation. How could one really rely on this? Therefore, when she first married into the Su family and was not blind, she was very generous. At that time, the servants of the Su family were also very happy to be ordered around by her. It was also because of this matter that Wanru secretly complained to Su Zhiheng many times about Hien. Like master, of course, the servant would be the same. Su Zhiheng was a person who could conspire with outsiders to kill his wife for benefits. Therefore, the servants in his residence would certainly be mercenary and would sail according to the wind. Sure enough, after the time it took to burn 2 sticks of incense, someone sneaked into the courtyard. It was the manservant from before. Hien said, "Little brother, there's a tea house nearby. Let's go in and talk." The manservant nodded. When Hien arrived at the tea house, he ordered a pot of good tea and a few plates of exquisite desserts. He was extremely generous. The manservant in front of him couldn't help but secretly ponder. Which family's young master was so rich? Little brother, how should I address you? Ian pushed the teacup in front of him. Young master, you can call me Fuwang. Ian did not take off his curtain hat and said softly, Then Fuwang, is the concubine mother called he Wanru in the residence right now? Fuwang looked troubled. Young master, I won't hide it from you. Our residence does have a concubine mother called he Wanru. However, a year ago, she stole Madam's property and sold it outside the residence. She was punished by eldest young master. Later, she fell seriously ill and died. Ian said, So that's how it is. She was not surprised. A year ago, not long after her death, He Wanru was dealt with by Su Jiheng. In fact, she had already reminded He Wanru. Since Su Jiheng could kill her to keep a secret, he could also kill her. Young master, you are looking for concubine mother He. The manservant looked at He Yin. However, his face was covered by the curtain hat, and he could not see what this person looked like. He only vaguely felt that he was very young. I was concubine mother He's childhood playmate. However, I was not in Shuajing in the past. He Yin sighed. I haven't seen her for many years. I originally wanted to see her, but I didn't expect. Fuwang suddenly understood. What childhood playmate? Was he interested in He Wanru, or was he her past lover? After all, although he had never seen her, he had heard that concubine mother, he was very beautiful and charming. She was so attractive that his young master was so infatuated that he did not even care about eldest young mistress. A concubine who made a mistake would not be buried in the Su family's tomb, He Yin said. Where is she buried? If possible, I want to take her away. Young master, after concubine mother he died of illness. She was rolled up in a mat and thrown into a mass grave, Fuwang said with difficulty. Now, I'm afraid that her bones can no longer be found. He Yin sneered in his heart. At that time, Su Jiheng was very affectionate towards He Wanru. She had envied him. Now, it seemed that this man was really cold-blooded and heartless. When it came to her, she could say that he did not love her, so he could be so ruthless. But when it came to He Wanru, the woman he truly loved, she was just like this. Fuwang saw that the man in front of him was silent, and thought that he was really a sentimental person. He was already married and still could not forget her. He Yin raised his head and asked him, Then what about concubine mother He's personal maid? If they're still here, I want to take them away from here. These years, I miss a lot of things about Wanru. Perhaps they can tell me. Young master, concubine mother, He's personal maid left the Fu after she passed away, Fuwang said. He Yin smiled slightly. Then what about the other servants in the courtyard? Fuwang was stunned. He had just entered the Fu at the beginning of this year. When he entered the Fu, the Su family had also recruited a large number of servants. At that time, the children who came with them were still surprised. Generally speaking, this kind of large family had no lack of servants. Suddenly recruiting so many people, either the house was marrying a new wife and needed servants, or something had happened at home and the original people were no longer there. Suda did marry a new wife, but the wife was General Fei Hong's cousin. Eldest young mistress had brought enough servants with her when she entered the Fu, so the servants did not go to eldest young mistress's courtyard to serve her. Then something must have happened, so the original people were no longer there. The so-called no longer there actually meant that they were dead. Fuwang was not stupid. On the contrary, he was the smartest among this group of servants. However, he could only guard the door, so he often complained about the unfairness of fate. However, at this moment, he saw a corner of an iceberg from this strange man's mouth. For things like secrets, the more you knew, the easier it was to die. But at the same time, it was easy to change one's fate. Riches and honor were found in danger. Without risk, how could there be riches and honor? He Yin saw that this servant's eyes were already shining with desire, so she faintly added, Fuwang, I see that you are quite smart. How does your master treat you? Fuwang was stunned. After a while, he said, Master doesn't remember this little one. That's a pity. He Yin smiled. If it were me, I would definitely put a talent like you to good use. Fuwang was a little excited. Some words did not need to be said. He Yin took out a silver ingot from her sleeve and put it on the table. Today, I also know a lot of information. Thank you. However, if you can help me find out more information, such as concubine mother he's maids, or the servants who were still there at that time, you can get much more than this. Also, she exhorted, when doing these things, be careful. So many servants have left the Fu. The master of the Su family seems to be very strict. If you're not careful, Fu Wang, you might also leave the Fu. That would be a pity. Fu Wang looked at the young master in front of him. He was both nervous and excited. He asked uneasily, but where should this little one go to find young master? The fish had taken a bait. Yin smiled slightly. When I have free time, I will come here to sit. Fu Wang, if you need me, you can come here. Who knows when I will come? After saying this, she got up and left the tea room, leaving the servant sitting at the table alone. His expression was unpredictable. As soon as he left, Yan's smile faded. Before dealing with Fu Wang, Yan observed the servants coming in and out of the Su family's door. He found that most of them were unfamiliar faces. The group of people when she first married into the Su family were almost all gone. This was very natural. Su Jiheng wanted to cut the weeds and eliminate the roots, so those servants could not be left. Yan actually did not expect to find any survivors. He was afraid that Su Jiheng had already destroyed all the witnesses. However, she needed a servant like Fu Wang to work for her in the Su family. Paper could not wrap fire. There would always be traces of what was done. It was not a witness, but as long as there was some material evidence, such as something left behind by Huan Ru, it could become material evidence one day in the future. If no one found out, Fu Wang could collect information for her. But if someone found out, Su Jiheng would be nervous. A nervous person's work would always be full of loopholes. A person with a guilty conscience, walking under the sun, would suspect that the shadow was an evil spirit coming for revenge. Fu Wang was smart and ambitious, and that was enough. For example, when Rufei sent Ding Yi to harm her, Su Jiheng, as her pillow, watched coldly from the sidelines. How they used the people around her deal with her. She did not do anything in return at all. Su Jiheng and Rufei's nightmare had just begun. When Yin returned to the Xiao family, it was almost evening. As soon as he walked into the courtyard, he heard Bai Ronwei and Xiao Jing talking. Xiao Jing said, "You don't have to make so many. One for Huaijin is enough." Bai Ronwei rebuked, "How can you do this? Besides, these sachets were all embroidered by the servant girls. I just stuffed some herbs inside. It's not hard." Ian stopped and bowed to them. "Young Master Xiao, young mistress." "Young Master He," Bai Ronwei said with a smile. "You came the right time. I was just about to ask someone to give you a sachet." She took 2 sachets from the servant girl beside her and handed them to Yin. "One is for you, and the other is for Huaijin." Yin took them and looked at them. The sachets were very small. One was black with a silver python embroidered on it, and the other was an ordinary auspicious cloud pattern. They should be for her. It's almost the Mid-Autumn Festival. I asked the servant girls to make some sachets. There are herbs and protective talismans inside. You and Huaijin often go out, so it's not bad to have them. She smiled. "Young Master He, please don't dislike them." Ian did not expect that she would have one. He was very surprised. "I won't dislike them. Thank you very much, young mistress. You're Huaijin's friend. You don't have to be so polite," Xiao Jing said warmly. Ian nodded. She was always a loss when it came to the overflowing kindness of the Xiao family couple. "That's right. In 3 days, there will be a banquet." Bai Ronwei seemed a little embarrassed. "I told young Master He earlier that the banquet will be hosted in my name. At that time, there will be many madams and misses. Young Master He, are you busy that day? If not, you can stay at home." Yin, they were choosing a wife for Xiao Ju. Why was she chosen? Yin hurriedly said, "Let's talk about it later," and ran away. Looking at Yan's back as he hurried away, Bai Ronwei said curiously, "Why is young Master He so afraid when he hears about a girl? Although he's still young, it's not impossible for him to get engaged. Could it be that he's been with Huaijin for too long and wants to be alone for the rest of his life?" Xiao Jing smiled. "Huaijin treats him very well." "That's true." Bai Ronwei nodded. After she married into the family, Although she knew that Xiao Ju didn't have a bad heart, she wasn't someone who liked to show her emotions. But towards this young master it could be said that she was very protective of him. It's good to have friends. Xiao Jing's gaze was gratified. At least, there are many things that he could discuss with others. Under the oil lamp, Hien leaned on the table and looked at the sachet that was wrapped around her finger. Bai Rongwei gave her 2 sachets and asked her to give the other one to Xiao Ju. Xiao Ju's sachet was very beautiful. Hien wrapped the red string around her finger and sighed at her heart. Even a maid of the Xiao family was so good at needlework. It really made her feel ashamed. Hien obviously didn't know how to needlework. When she first married into the Su family, Huanru would make shoes and clothes for Su Zhiheng every few days. Hien stayed up several nights and only managed to make a handkerchief. She wanted to embroider mandarin ducks playing in water on the handkerchief. Su Zhiheng stared at it for a long time before asking, "This is a duck?" Hien was greatly shocked. Su Zhiheng laughed loudly. Although he later accepted the handkerchief, he didn't use it. Hien understood. After all, he was an official in the imperial court. If he took out a handkerchief with a duck embroidered on it, he would be laughed at by his colleagues. But later, when she found the crumpled and yellowed handkerchief at the bottom of Su Zhiheng's drawer, she felt a little wronged when she thought about how her hands were full of needle marks. She had always been learning things that men needed to learn. She didn't know how to play the zither, go calligraphy, painting, needlework, and embroidery. When she had to work as an ordinary woman, she felt at a loss. There was also a small wooden basket on the table. In the basket, there was some needlework and silver scissors. It should be used by the servants. Hien picked up the silver scissors. The scissors were very delicate. She was used to holding swords, knives, sticks, and spears with both hands. But this pair of scissors felt particularly heavy. In fact, Hien didn't know how to do needlework at all. After all, during the years that he joined the army, he only had 2 sets of clothes. It was inevitable that there would be times when they would be tattered. As long as there was a tear, the brothers would casually find a piece of cloth or something to fill in the hole. But in the end, the men's skills weren't as meticulous as the women's. It could only be said that they sewed, but it really couldn't be considered beautiful. Sometimes, if there were too many patches on a piece of clothing, it would look worse than a beggar on the street. Hien had also sewed by candlelight before, but that was already a matter of his previous life. The 2 sachets were placed side by side in front of her. Xiao Ju's sachet was more gorgeous, while Hien's was more ordinary. She reached out and pinched it. The insides were flat. She could vaguely feel a triangular piece of paper and some hairy medicinal herbs. Hien thought for a moment, then took out the needlework from the wooden basket. The oil in the oil lamp was about to burn out. Hien stretched and stood up. Half the night had passed. She wiped the beads of blood from her fingers and lightly sighed. It seems that Lady He's needlework wasn't very good. In both her previous and current life, she really didn't have any talent for needlework. Hien smiled, extinguished the lamp, and got on the bed. The moonlight outside the window was weak, faintly illuminating a corner of the front table. On the table, there were 2 sachets lying side by side. They didn't look any different from before. In the capital, Shun Mushue's room, the lanterns were still lit. The servants in the courtyard were already asleep, but Shun Mushue wasn't sleepy at all. She laid flat on the bed and stared at the sachets hanging in the 4 corners of the curtains. It had been a few days since she returned to the capital. Xiao Ju should have already known. This time, she didn't go to the Xiao mansion. But at the same time, Xiao Ju didn't say anything. It was eldest Madame Bai Rong who sent someone to the Xiao mansion to ask about her. Shun Mushue was a bit annoyed as she turned over. Even Censor Shun could tell that something was wrong. He asked her if she had quarreled with Xiao Ju. Shun Mushue shook her head and perfunctorily brushed it off. But in her heart, she felt a bit more nervous. She originally wanted to let Xiao Ju know that she was uncomfortable. But after a few days of stalemate, she was the one who was unsure. Perhaps Xiao Ju didn't know. He was a person who didn't care about these things. But what if he knew and did it on purpose? There was a ball of fire in Shun Mushue's heart. When she left the Liangzhou guards, she found a figurine and a drawing made of wood in the box. She couldn't help but think about it. The figurine was a woman. Did Xiao Ju have someone in his heart? If that was the only thing, she wouldn't be so worried. But the figurine on the drawing was a female general, and her eyes were very similar to He Yan's. In an instant, all the things that she had suspected in the past became evidence in front of her eyes. Xiao Ju was overly close to and took care of He Yan. He Yan sometimes showed signs that made her uncomfortable. When they were in Jiang, Xiao Ju had also brought He Yan along. Xiao Ju's black jade, which never left his side, was once in He Yan's hand. The ointment that Xiao Ju especially emphasized not to take away appeared in He Yan's hands the next day. If he was gay, it would be too shocking. But what if He Yan was a woman? Shen Muxue closed her eyes. When the young lady was dressed as a young man, she was already very handsome and eye-catching. Her eyes were delicate and pretty. If she was dressed as a woman, Shen Muxue thought bitterly. She could easily catch people's attention. In the past few years, although she didn't have Xiao Ju, she didn't feel too threatened. This young man was very outstanding when he was young. He had a lazy temperament. Later on, when his family experienced great changes, he became more indifferent and introverted. Although his temperament was like this, his talent and appearance made the ladies who liked him throw themselves at him dauntlessly. But she had never seen Xiao Ju fall in love with anyone. He wasn't easy to fall in love. So Shen Muxue believed that she was the only woman in the world who could accompany him on the battlefield and support him. As long as there was enough time, everything would happen naturally. Her confidence came from her arrogance. But now, her arrogance was completely shattered. There was a woman who could do more than her. Not only could she accompany Xiao Ju on the battlefield, but she could also fight side by side with him. He Yan could do what she couldn't. As for family background, Xiao Jing could even marry by Rong Wei, who was a concubine's daughter. Xiao family didn't care about this at all. Shen Muxue's heart tightened. She couldn't get Xiao Ju's love, but she also didn't want to see He Yan beat her to it. She was the one who came first. She was the one who stayed by Xiao Ju's side the longest. In the dark night, Shen Muxue suddenly sat up. She put on her outer clothes, walked to the table, and lit the oil lamp. She found paper, brush, and ink and sat in front of the table. The light from the oil lamp was so dazzling that it hurt her eyes. Her hands were trembling slightly. After a while, Shen Muxue seemed to have made up her mind. She picked up the brush and started writing. No one would be satisfied if they didn't get a happy ending after spending so much time and energy. She couldn't accept such an ending. If Xiao Ju wasn't destined to stand on her side and think for her, then she could only start from He Yan's side. Shen Muxue wrote faster and faster. Suddenly, the tip of the brush was wrong. She used too much strength and scratched the paper. She stared blankly at the thin paper in front of her. She suddenly raised her hand, rolled the paper into a ball, and threw it on the floor. After a while, she covered her face with her hands and cried softly. Chapter 197. The residence that Lin Shuanghe found for He Yan had been missing for several days. Ever since he returned to Shuajing, Lin Shuanghe acted as if he didn't exist. He Yan also didn't want to rashly go to his door to find him. It wasn't good to ask someone to do something and rush him. After a while, He Yan began to suspect that this person was doing it on purpose. As usual, Xiao Ju left early in the morning and returned late at night. He didn't know what she was busy with. He Yan would appear during the day. Ever since she went to the Su residence to see Fu Wang, she didn't go to the Su residence again. She had to give Fu Wang the cold shoulder. When Fu Wang saw that He Yan didn't appear for a long time, he would definitely give up on the idea of pushing and pulling her. He was afraid that he would let go of this money tree. In order to prove his worth, he would only put in more effort to find useful information from the Su residence. He Yan wasn't in a hurry. In the past few days, other than secretly seeing He Yunsheng again, she also spent a few days at the entrance of the He residence. She didn't know if it was because of He Rufei, but the number of guards outside the He residence had more than doubled. He Yan didn't want to expose himself, so he could only hide in the dark and observe. He Rufei didn't do anything other than go to court every day. He and his colleagues mostly socialized at restaurants and didn't bring anyone home. In addition, he also went to the Sioux residence once with the so-called tonic for visiting his cousin. But was it really to visit He Sheening? Ian didn't think so. But in the eyes of outsiders, He Rufei's actions clearly showed that he had a close relationship with his younger sister. There were even rumors that because of the accident that happened to Su Yunxing's grandmother, He Rufei took care of his younger sister even more carefully. In the end, it actually gave He Rufei a good reputation. Ian only felt that it was a bit funny. He also felt that the He family's methods of acting were really endless. Autumn had arrived, and the heat of summer had completely faded. On this day, Hien had just returned from outside the residence and was surprised to find that the courtyard was much more lively. She had left early in the morning and did not know what had happened. However, Bai Gua happily ran over and whispered, "Young mistress is entertaining guests in the courtyard. Young master, you should wash up a little and go take a look." She leaned closer and said mysteriously, "There are many young ladies here today. Second young master is here too." She was young, so when she said these words, she was not shy or coy, but full of the innocence of a child. However, when Yin heard these words, they were not very pleasant to hear. Bai Rongwei had told her before that she would hold a banquet before the Mid-Autumn Festival. On the surface, it was to invite the ladies, but in fact, it was to matchmake Xiao Ju. Yin didn't expect her to come back so quickly. Usually, Xiao Ju would come back late. Sometimes, she would be asleep by the time Xiao Ju came back. But today there was a girl around, and she came back so early. What a coincidence. Bai Gua saw that Yin was silent and said, "Young master." Yin came back to his senses and forced a smile. "I won't go. I've been running around the whole day, and I'm really tired. I want to go back to my room and rest." Bai Gua, but she felt that Yin was in a bad mood and felt that it was strange. This young master, he was gentle and did not put on airs. He would take the initiative to clean the dishes and chopsticks. Sometimes, when he saw that she was hungry, he would deliberately leave some snacks in the dishes for her. Bai Gua felt that among all the masters she had met, other than the young master and his wife, this young master, he was the best. However, today, his unhappiness was clearly written on his face. After all, they had been master and servant for a while. Bai Gua thought, could it be that he had been wronged outside? Before she could figure out, Hien walked quickly down the corridor with his head lowered. Hien thought that what the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over. However, this corridor was connected to the pavilion of the main courtyard. Bai Rongwei saw him at a glance and called out, "Young master he." If he pretended that he didn't hear her, it would be too deliberate. Hien could only brace himself and turn around. He looked at Bai Rongwei and smiled. "Young Mistress Xiao." Bai Rongwei stood up and walked towards him. "I was just asking Huaijin when you would come back. I was afraid that you wouldn't be able to make it in time for today's autumn banquet. You came at the right time. We haven't started yet." The host was so kind. It would be impolite to leave at this time. Hien could only walk over and salute her. "Young mistress is so considerate." Xiao family's house was specially renovated according to his wife's preferences when old General Xiao was still alive. Xiao Ju's grandmother was from Suzhou. Therefore, the Xiao family's courtyard was especially elegant and unique in Shuo capital. Bai Rongwei didn't invite many guests to the banquet. There were only 4 or 5 people in total. It wasn't clear whether they were her good friends or not. However, the 4 young women sitting there were each beautiful in their own way. Xiao Ju sat beside Xiao Jing. The 2 brothers were famous for being handsome men in Dawei. For a moment, the courtyard was like a fairyland. Dawei had a strict rule against men and women. Men and women were not allowed to sit together at the age of 7. This rule was abolished not long after Emperor Wen Xuan ascended the throne. Emperor Wen Xuan yearned for the elegant and unrestrained manner of the famous scholars of the past. He didn't think that it was because of the old rules. Therefore, Dawei wasn't as strict towards unmarried men and women as the previous dynasty. Bai Rongwei smiled and explained to the others at the banquet, "This is young Master He. He's a good friend of Huaijin. At such a young age, he has already been bestowed the title of Mu and Lang by His Majesty." She ordered the servants to add a bowl and chopsticks for Hien. However, For some reason, the bowl was placed next to Xiao Jing. Bai Rongwei sat next to a round-faced madam and said to Hien, "Today, we have invited a few friends to our residence to try the newly made chrysanthemum crisps. Everyone, please treat this as a normal family banquet. There is no need to be polite. Just be at ease." Although she said that other than Xiao Jing and his wife, the older madams, and the indifferent Xiao Ju, the rest of the guests couldn't be considered casual. Hien sat next to Xiao Ju and looked at Xiao Ju. Xiao Ju sat on the other side of Xiao Jing. He rarely touched his chopsticks. Most of the time, he just sat there. Although he hid it well, if one looked closely, they could see that he was impatient. The other maidens were different. They sat at the long table directly opposite Xiao Ju. The more timid ones glanced at Xiao Ju out of the corner of their eyes. The lingering affection in their eyes couldn't be ignored. The bolder ones stared directly at Xiao Ju. Their beautiful eyes were filled with adoration. It was enough to make one's bones melt. Hien thought to himself. Bai Rongwei knew that Xiao Ju didn't like people like Shen Muxue. The four maidens that she found were completely different from Shen Muxue's cold and aloof temperament. However, their appearance was comparable to Shen Muxue's. Sitting there, she wanted to flip the table and leave. If Shen Muxue was here, he would definitely be angered to death. However, although she thought this in her heart, she couldn't show it on her face. Hien lowered his head and ate. At this time, he didn't talk while eating. He just treated it as a normal meal. The only difference was that there were four beautiful maidens sitting across from him. This meal was extremely awkward. Hien wasn't the only one who felt awkward. At the end of the meal, even Xiao Jing and Bai Rongwei couldn't handle it. After all, although Xiao Ju's personality wasn't as gentle as Xiao Jing's, her face was still very attractive. Moreover, Xiao Jing was already married. The four maidens all looked at Xiao Ju. They were all noble maidens who were carefully raised in Shuajing. They were very polite. However, the four of them still found some topics to talk about with Xiao Ju. For example, does second young master Xiao like autumn? What do you do on a daily basis? Will you be staying in Shuajing after this? And other meaningless questions. Xiao Ju answered them. However, if she could answer them in one word, she wouldn't say more than two. Most of the time, it was Bai Rongwei and Xiao Jing who came out to fill in the gaps. Hien was quite happy in his heart. However, when he thought about it, he felt that he was being silly. How could he be happy about such things? Was he possessed? Night was coming. After the meal, the madam said goodbye to Xiao Jing and her husband. Hien and Xiao Ju stood to the side. The four maidens' reluctant gazes almost saw through Xiao Ju. One of the bolder maidens looked at Xiao Ju and asked with a smile, "When second young master Xiao was at the hunting ground, no one could compare to his charm. After this, when are you free? Would you be willing to practice archery with me?" Xiao Ju looked at her expressionlessly for a while. Then, the corner of her mouth twitched. "I have a habit when I practice." The maiden looked forward to it. Life and death. Cough, cough, cough. Xiao Jing interrupted in time. She laughed and said, "Huai Jin is joking. He likes to joke." However, as soon as she said this, the maiden's mother's expression changed. She quickly pulled her daughter away. Bai Rongwei was angry and amused at the same time. After they left, she said to Xiao Ju, "You child, why are you still the same as before? If you don't like her, then don't like her. Why do you have to deliberately scare her? Miss Tian has also practiced martial arts. She's also cheerful and generous. I think she is very good." When Xiao Ju didn't say anything, Bai Rongwei continued, "What about Miss Li, the one who sat opposite you just now? She looks weak and delicate. She has good handwriting and can speak eloquently. She is very gentle and quiet." Xiao Ju still didn't say anything. Bai Rongwei looked up and saw Hien. She asked Hien, "Young master He, you have also met the four maidens today. Don't you think it is a good idea?" Hien was speechless. What did this have to do with her? Disaster really fell from the sky. However, in front of these people, Hien could only ask himself. He slowly opened his mouth. The four maidens are very good. Their temperaments and appearances are first class. Whoever marries them will be blessed by his past life. Bai Rongwei probably felt that she had gained the approval of Xiao Ju's good friend. She said, Huaijin, look, even young master, he thinks they are good. Xiao Ju suddenly said in a calm voice, sister-in-law, if you think they're good, why don't you invite them back and give them a big brother? With big brother's temperament and appearance, they shouldn't feel wronged. These words were so harsh that even the usually gentle Xiao Jing couldn't help but warn Xiao Huaijin. Xiao Ju was unmoved. She glanced at Xiao Jing and said calmly, Big brother, why don't you think about what you did when mother wanted to choose a wife for you? Don't do to others what you don't want done to you. Big brother should know better than I do. After she finished speaking, she didn't care about Xiao Jing and Byronway's reactions and left in a huff. Ian stood there and felt inexplicably awkward. He softly explained to Xiao Ju, perhaps the commander-in-chief is in a bad mood today. Young mistress, please don't take it to heart. I'm not taking it to heart. Byronway was stunned for a moment. She seemed to have recovered from her shock and looked at her husband. However, was Huaijin angry just now? Despite the rumors that the Right Army's commander-in-chief training troops was unreasonable, harsh, and cold, almost no one had ever seen Xiao Ju lose his temper in the Fu. Most of the time, he was just too lazy to care. It seemed like it had been many years since he had written the words, I'm angry, on his face. He's done this before. Why is he so angry this time? She didn't understand. Someone was knocking on the door. Again and again. The knocking was very precise and unyielding. Even if the people inside were too lazy to pay attention to it, the people outside were not discouraged. It was as if they were going to knock until the end of time if they did not open the door. In the entire courtyard, the only person who had the guts to do this was the heroine. Xiao Ju paused for a moment and said, Come in. Ian's head poked in from behind the door. She also knew that Xiao Ju was in a bad mood. She had a fawning smile on her face as she closed the door behind her. She walked forward and asked, Commander-in-Chief, are you all right? Xiao Ju sat on the chair and replied, I'm fine. Looking at his expression, he didn't seem to be fine. What he said to Byronway just now was a little too much. However, Ian was quite happy to hear him say that. However, she quickly scolded herself in her heart. How could you be like this? How could she, as an outsider, cheer for a family conflict? How was she different from those despicable people? During her stay here, Byronway had taken care of her a lot. It was reasonable for her to help mediate and not add fuel to the fire. Ian ran in front of him and leaned half of her body on the table. She looked at him and said, Commander-in-Chief, young mistress, Xiao has good intentions. What you did just now was a little hurtful. Xiao Ju's gaze shifted to her face. His eyes were cold. Lady He, what do you think I should do? He had called her Lady He many times. Sometimes it was teasing, and sometimes it was mean. However, this time, it was cold and even a little angry. Ian carefully chose her words. At least, you should be more tactful. Xiao Ju sneered. Why should I? Ian choked. If it was Lady He, would you be more tactful? He suddenly asked. Ian was puzzled. I'm a woman. If your father and brother were to find a few handsome young masters like they did today, he said sarcastically, wouldn't you reject them directly? Ian thought that if it was in the past, she would have to be polite and courteous in order to save everyone's face. However, now that she had someone she liked, she would not be able to force it. However, she could not say this to Xiao Ju. The person in front of her did not care about her avoidance. He stared at her and asked again, Lady He, what should you do? Ian could not go against her conscience when she met his gaze. After a while, she slammed the table. I thought about it. If it were me, I would have made the same choice as you, Commander-in-Chief. Maybe I would have said even worse things. Commander-in-Chief, you're right. Well said. If you don't like them, just reject them. There's no need to give them the wrong hints. Sometimes, being polite and courteous can be seen as flirting to the other party. Flirting can make others unable to sleep at night. If you don't have such intentions, then you're lying. In the end, there was a hint of complaint in her tone. No one knew who she was referring to. Xiao Ju saw her indignant expression, and her expression softened. She smiled. At least you have some awareness. Ian saw that she was in a better mood. She took out a sachet from her sleeve and gave it to her. This is for you. Xiao Ju took it and looked at it. She looked up and asked, You made this. How is that possible? He Yin replied without hesitation. How could I know how to make this? It was Grandma Xiao who made it. She also made one for me. I forgot to give it to you earlier. She took out her own sachet with cloud patterns. I heard that there are herbs and amulets in it. She saw that Xiao Ju was holding the sachet and didn't say anything. She leaned closer. I didn't expect Grandma Xiao to prepare one for me. Commander-in-Chief, Grandma Xiao is gentle and kind. She's wholeheartedly thinking about you. Although the method is not to your liking, you should talk to her about this kind of thing. There's no need to hurt the harmony between the two of you. There's no need to be so calculative between family members. She kept talking and moving her head closer and closer. Xiao Ju couldn't help but laugh. He bent his fingers and pushed her head back. Stop, I'm not angry. At first, he was angry, but it wasn't because of Bai Rongwei. This person still didn't know anything. He felt a little helpless. Being angry at someone who didn't know anything was destined to not be able to vent his anger. Really? Ian looked at him. Really? He lowered his eyes and thought of something. After a while, he said, I'll be out of the city for a few days. Is it okay for you to stay here alone? Ian was startled. Do you need my help? Xiao Ju had been leaving early and returning late these days. Ian could sense that he had something important to do. It must have something to do with Su Jingfu and Xiao Zhongwu. Although she was busy with the He family and the Su family, if Xiao Ju needed her help, Ian wouldn't refuse. No need. I can do it myself. Ian nodded. When will you be back? I'm not sure. Xiao Ju looked at the burning wick. I'll try to be back before mid-autumn. Prime Minister Su's residence in the capital was brightly lit at this moment. Prime Minister Su was a scholar. When he held a banquet at home, he didn't like women to dance. At most, he would find 2 guqin players to play the guqin. Chu Zhao knelt in front of the small table and looked at the teacup in front of him. The steam rising from the teacup was like a layer of gauze that covered his expression, making his face look unreal. Su Jingfu didn't like to drink. He only liked to drink tea. The people who came to the Su family to give gifts also knew how to cater to his preferences. Even the tea leaves that were given to the servants could be sold at a good price. The servants stood on both sides respectfully. Su Jingfu didn't have a son. Everyone in the Su family knew that Su Jingfu treated this favorite pupil of his as his own son. Su Jingfu's only daughter, Su Pingting, had a deep affection for Chu Xilan. Sooner or later, the teacher and the student would become husband and son-in-law. You went to Jiang very smoothly this time, Su Jingfu said with a smile. When he was young, he was handsome and refined, but when he grew older, he became kind and amiable. Just by looking at his appearance, one would think that he was an old man who was easy to get along with. He took a sip of tea and said, However, when you were in the Rendezvous, why did you stay for a few more days? Chu Zhao replied gently. The people in the Rendezvous were hungry. Xilan couldn't bear to leave alone. I wanted to stay in the Rendezvous to help and see if I could ask for reinforcements. I didn't expect that Generals Yin would lead troops to help and solve the Rendezvous' urgent situation. It was obvious that he wasn't lying. Su Jingfu was still smiling kindly. He didn't say that he was right, but he didn't say that he was wrong either. The atmosphere was a little tense. Just as they were in a deadlock, a girl's voice suddenly sounded. Father, why didn't you call me when Brother Xilan came? The next moment, a girl in a yellow dress flew in like a flower and sat next to Chu Xilan. This girl was very beautiful. She was as delicate as a porcelain doll. There was an air of arrogance between her eyebrows. She looked to be about 17 or 18 years old. Her clothes and jewelry were luxurious and expensive. There was a ruby hairpin in her hairband. The ruby was delicate and beautiful, making her look like a rose. This was Su Jingfu's only daughter, Su Pingting. Su Jingfu only had this pearl in his palm when he was old. He almost spoiled her to the heavens. Even the current princess was not as fastidious as Su Pingting. When Su Pingting arrived at the banquet hall, the atmosphere immediately eased. Su Jingfu shook his head and laughed. You came here to criticize me. You don't even care about me. Everyone says that girls are biased towards outsiders. Really, when Su Pingting heard that, she didn't feel embarrassed. Instead, she raised her eyebrows and said coquettishly, I see Father every day, but I haven't seen Brothers Island in a long time. Father, can you not let Brothers Island go too far away from the capital next time? She naturally held Chu Zhao's arm and looked at him. Brothers Island, when I heard that you went to Jiang, I was scared to death. How could Father do that? Fortunately, you're fine. When you weren't around, I prayed for your safe return in front of the Bodhisattva every day. It seems that the Bodhisattva heard my prayers and protected you. Su Jingfu said sourly. I didn't see you praying for me. Father. Okay, little ancestor. I won't say any more, okay? Su Jingfu begged and looked at Chu Zhao. However, Xilan, you came at the right time. I have something to say. Chu Xilan looked at Su Jingfu. Teacher, please speak. I heard that today, Xiao Ruby's wife invited a few young ladies from her colleagues' manors to the Xiao mansion as guests. She said that they were guests, but it was obviously to choose a wife for Xiao Huaijin. You're about the same age as Xiao Huaijin. Since I'm your teacher, I should worry about these things for you. Su Pingting was stunned. Her face immediately turned red. Father, now you know how to be shy? Su Jingfu smiled and teased. Then, he said, Xilan, you're my most outstanding student. You grew up with Pingting and are Qing Mei's childhood sweetheart. When you were young, I planned to marry Pingting to you when you grew up. Looking at it now, that time has come. What do you think? The servants in the hall all buried their heads to hide their surprise. Although they knew that this day would come, they couldn't help but feel surprised when they actually heard it. After all, with Chu Zhao's status, marrying Prime Minister Su's daughter was really climbing up the social ladder. Chu Zhao stood up, lifted the corner of his robe, and knelt down in front of Su Jingfu. He bowed to Su Jingfu. This student thanks teacher for your kindness. To be able to marry Pingting is this student's good fortune from 3 lifetimes. Marriage is completely up to teacher. That you're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.